Hello guys, welcome to Soul Fiction. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto ruled Nazarick beside Ainz Overlord? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. 2 Thrones, 1 Storm. The torches of the throne room burned with a steady, unscented flame, no smoke, only a clean orange that lacquered the black stone in layers of light. The high doors stood open like the mouth of something sleeping. Below the dais, guardians and maids waited in lines as crisp as a blade's reflection. Above them, on 2 thrones raised shoulder to shoulder, sat a lich in robes that caught the light like oil. And a blond man whose cloak draped like a piece of stormcloud torn and stitched into clothing. Ainz gown did not fidget. He had nothing left that would. Naruto Uzumaki fidgeted exactly once. He rolled his shoulder, exhaled, and then went still because there were eyes on him that respected stillness. Albedo, Ainz said, voice as smooth as a scroll unfurling. Proceed. Albedo stepped forward, armor singing soft against itself. By the will of the Supreme One Ainz gown and Lord Naruto, co-rulers of the Great Tomb of Nazarick, today's audiences and reports will. Ainz tilted his skull toward Naruto, a tiny motion. Almost private. Naruto caught it and stood. He didn't raise his voice. The room came closer to hear it. I don't like speeches, he said. A ripple, barely there, ran through the gathered. But I like repeating myself even less, so I'll keep this simple. If you are mine, nobody gets to break you. If you are not mine, nobody gets to break you where I can see it. He looked at Cocytus, at Aura and Mare, at Demiurge, at the line of Pleiades. He made eye contact because that was how vows stuck. And if we say we protect a place, Naruto went on, we protect the people in it. Not the walls, not the map, people. I don't care how much paper says otherwise. He sat. Ainz's empty gaze held the room. You heard him, Ainz said, dry as ash. I'll have the paperwork ready by evening. Demiurge's smile sharpened a notch. Albedo bowed deeper than necessary. Cocytus' eyes warmed like embers banked under snow. Across the floor, Lupus Regina Beta hid a grin by putting a hand over her mouth like a laughing saint on a stained glass window. Naruto leaned back, hands tucked in his sleeves. On the stone at his feet, a thread-thin line of chalk marked where his boot would rest when the next crisis came. He'd measured his own patience without thinking about it. It made him smile. The crisis arrived 3 breaths later. It began as a shimmer at the edge of hearing, the faint chime of something that didn't belong to stone or air. The torches guttered. At the far doors, a wind tried to come in and then changed its mind. Albedo's head snapped toward the corridor that led down to the 6th floor. 6th floor wards have glitched, Mare whispered, a hand flying to his mouth. Aura's smile vanished. Glitched how? Like someone taught them to blink. Mare's eyes glowed with a druid's green. Aura. She was already moving. Naruto was, too. Ainz's voice carried after them, the ruler's tone wrapped in bone. Albedo. Secure the throne room. Cocytus. To the 5th. Demiurge. Close the outer rumor spreads. He didn't need to say the rest. Naruto. Take the breach. They hit the corridor at a run. The corridors of Nazarick moved when they were in a good mood, and now they were in a mood. Walls flexed. Doors slid aside. The air smelled faintly of parchment and frost. Aura matched Naruto's pace with a hunter's easy economy. Lupus Regina loped at his shoulder, cheerful even when she was hunting. A sunshine smile hung wrong on the face of a wolf you invited into your house. 6th floor, Aura said, braid clipping her shoulder as she turned. It's mine. I'm not here to lead your dog, Naruto said. And Lupus Regina laughed, delighted. Rude, but funny, she said. I like you. Professional. Aura sighed, but her mouth twitched. We've had tiny experiments down there. Some traps we've been testing. If they've been tricked into blinking. Someone mapped your blinks, Naruto said, already splitting shadow from flesh. 3 clones peeled off him and sprinted ahead. They left chalk on wall edges. Quick flicks of his hand like spelling his name without letters. How does chalk help? Lupus Regina asked, voice sing-song. It doesn't. It's for later, Naruto said. The 6th floor exhaled a damp breath. The stair wound them into a forest under a sky that wasn't a sky. Bioluminescent motes hung in the air like pollen that had learned choreography. They head under branches that had not been alive since an earlier world invented them and ran all the same, a racetrack drawn in the dark. Naruto broke his outline to the trees, his body a smear where outlines loved to catch. Aura touched bark and the forest shivered quiet, her domain now listening. Lupus Regina's hands stretched, fingers cracking like tiny bells as she rolled her wrists, healer comfort R. Icing over quiet violence like a blanket before a blade. They found the first misfire where a deadfall ought to be. The tripline was there, proud of itself, and also not there. The line blinked in and out with a rhythm that wasn't how trap makers wrote music. Cute, Aura said through her teeth. Somebody taught my trap to wink. Then wink back, Naruto said. His palm set against air, chakra tipped into wind. He listened with his hand. And felt the pattern. A simple 2-beat, silence, 2 more, silence, then long. 4 in a breath, he murmured. He eased his fingers through on the breath. The line didn't see him. His clones followed, slipping through like fish passing a net. They came upon bodies in a clearing where nothing had business dying. 2 patrol gnolls lay sleeping with their throats uncut. As if death had decided to be neat today. That was a kindness. And a message. Lupus Regina crouched, hair falling forward. She sniffed, a little sound. No toxin. Magic. Ah, she smiled again, small and wicked. They sang the blood to rest. Nobody sings to my people without paying, Aura said. Her voice was a high wire. Pretty, dangerous, one misstep and you paid with bones. Tracks. Naruto knelt and touched the moss. The light didn't like him there and went away. He closed his eyes and opened other ones. Scent and pressure. Heat memory. The slight brush on a leaf where someone Ho didn't weigh enough for this much confidence had gone through. Naruto pointed. Split, he said. 2 to the west, same rhythm. 1 east who thinks he's alone. Aura nodded and took the west with O. T looking for permission because it was hers. Lupus Regina flicked a lock of hair behind her ear, hummed a hymn nobody decent would recognize, and followed Naruto toward the east. The east path walked through a brush-thick choke where the trees leaned together, conspirators over their secret. A fox watched them pass with eyes like coins that had never been spent. Twice, the air snagged on Naruto's arm with an invisible burr. He bared his teeth at the nothing and said, not now. They found the lone intruder crouched over a stone that had no right to be here, black basalt polished into a mirror of nothing. The figure's cloak drank light. The blade in their hand didn't drink anything at all because it was not, strictly speaking, present. It was a suggestion of a blade, and the world did the rest. Naruto loved a good challenge until it tried to kill his people. Hello, he said, cheerful as a vendor under a summer awning. We're closed. The intruder moved like a bird startles. Up, a flash of weight, a twist. The knot blade slicing sideways. Naruto bent backward under it, felt it nip a hair that had already forgotten his head. He came up with a palmful of air that turned hard at the edge. A wind release that didn't look like much until it was there, the sound of it like a thin scream. The intruder didn't defend with their knot blade, they didn't need to. Their weapon passed through Naruto's wind, through a tree behind him. Through a stone, and then through its own absence. The world figured itself out and put everything back with the understanding that a line had been drawn through it. Phase, Lupus Regina said, softly pleased. Nasty. Nasty's fine, Naruto said. Nasty's honest. He didn't try to block again. Wise men often chose distance. Naruto chose angle. He let the next T-swing go over a shoulder and stepped into the wrong space, the space the intruder had just left, crowding them. He put his knee behind their knee and his shoulder against their shoulder and introduced the intruder to the ground. They were quick. The knot blade whispered up and would have cut him in half if Naruto hadn't already slipped 2 inches sideways, as if a thought had thrown his balance. The blade kissed his cloak and turned the fabric to the idea of ash. Naruto grimaced and shoved a thumb against a small bony notch where the intruder's jaw met their ear. Lupus Regina's hand hovered near the intruder's throat. Do I pinch? I could pinch. Later, Naruto said, not taking his eyes off the black hood. Your friends came clever. You came clever. But you forgot to kill. That's either mercy or arrogance. The intruder said nothing. Not cowardice. Training. They coiled for another escape. Naruto eased his weight off, just enough to let them think he'd give them one. He held out his fair hand like he was making an offer across a table. Take it, he said. Or try me. A moment stretched like pulled sugar. Then the intruder went for his throat and Naruto smiled because people were predictable. He wasn't there when the blade arrived. A substitution jutsu swapped him for one of his chalk-scratched kunai that clinked on the stone. The intruder slashed through metal that refused to complain and hissed when his hand closed over their wrist from behind. He tagged them. It was a gentle tap, as taps went, a brush of knuckle to cloak seam, a smear of chakra gloss that would taste like moss and rain if you had the senses to taste that kind of thing. The intruder tore free, rolled, and launched, vanishing into a throat of trees so narrow even shadows had to exhale to pass. Ah, Lupus Regina said. You let them go. Did I? Naruto said, and being unfair cheered him up. Besides, Aura will bring back the others. They'll be angry I wasn't there, Lupus Regina sang. They'll be alive, Naruto said. That's enough. They returned through a forest that acted like nothing had happened. People who lived where the dead had opinions learned to respect moods. Naruto left chalk marks every 30 paces. The clones left different ones, a private code that would mean nothing if you didn't know the joke they were telling each other. Back in the high corridors, Aura waited with a more pronounced braid and 2 prisoners slumped like laundry. She looked less than pleased. 3 others fled. Mare has sealed. My trap blink was not my trap. Someone bought a rhythm and taught it to my forest. Then we unteach it, Naruto said. He looked at the nearest prisoner. He was young. So many of them were. And his boots were too good. Wealth had a way of creeping into your stitching if you had it too long. Albedo wants exemplary punishments, Aura muttered. Of course she does. Naruto crouched so he could look the prisoner in the face without bending his pride into a shape it would resent later. You've still got time to make this the worst choice you ever make but not the last. Who do you sing for? The prisoner tilted his chin, measuring the corners of the room for escape that didn't exist. It's not singing if you call it for what it is. Ha, Lupus Regina said, delighted. A poet. Naruto set his hands on his knees. We both know this ends one of 2 ways. You try to trade nonsense, or you try to trade truth. I'm in a hurry, so I'll make you an offer, a corridor that ends with you breathing air not from a coffin. You start with something I can check in a day. You'll kill us when you're done. The prisoner said, and he didn't mean himself. He looked beyond his own skin when he said it, at whatever choir he sang for. You can't trade what isn't yours to give, Naruto said. If you talk, you're not paying me with your people. You're paying me with my time. He tilted his head. What do you call the buyers? The prisoner's mouth held stubborn. Then he exhaled what he'd been taught to keep. The choir, he said, because sometimes names were simple. They take relics from the dead and teach the living to shut doors. They sell to the custodians. That's all I know. Custodians of what? Lupus Regina asked. The empty throne, the prisoner whispered, as if the words hurt. They say they keep the world safe from gods. Even gods that aren't gods yet. Aura had gone very still. Naruto glanced up. Tie his hands, not his future, he said. Bread and water, and someone kind to watch him. Kind doesn't mean soft. Aura said. I know the difference. They took the prisoners deeper. The corridors cooled. Somewhere, a fountain whispered to itself, stone speaking water's language. Naruto stood in it a moment and let the sound skim his nerves back into order. In the strategy room, the table was a terrain of polished wood. Maps layered like winter clothing lay across it, one of roots and gullies, one of coin and grain, one of rumor. Ainz stood by the rumor map. He held a quill like a scepter and touched points on the parchment where lies would do the most good. Demiurge watched with a look that would have made a warmer man worry about his future. Albedo stood with her gauntlets hooked at the hip and an expression that said she was already drafting death notices. You didn't kill them, she said when Naruto came in. I didn't, Naruto said, and put his chalk on the table as if to say he had brought something back from the dark. Letting the one go matters more. Because you tracked him, Demiurge said, almost affectionate. Delicious. Because he's a courier, Naruto said. He stepped to the second map, the one of coin and grain, and drew 2 lines, one neat, one messy. He'll run to where the coin is clean and the water tastes like tin instead of river. He thinks he can wash in it. Ainz set the quill down. I have already sealed 3 flux points of gossip, he said. 2 in the guild net, 1 in a merchant house that thinks it is not mine. You intend to chase? Nod, Naruto said, and did. But first, the mercy clause. Albedo's mouth thinned. Again, every time, Naruto said. We write it in. Surrender in the next breach buys corridor and bread. That doesn't change punishment for those who break oaths, and it doesn't make us kind. It makes us efficient. Mercy costs, Albedo said. Everything worth anything does, Naruto said. If we buy a village's loyalty for less than the price of rebuilding it, we did bad math. Ainz reached without looking and slid the contract parchment toward Albedo. There is precedent, he said dryly, for spending to save. Stamp it. She hesitated. Stamping meant policymaker approval, not mere tolerance. She stamped. The seal sank into wax that smelled faintly of cold iron. Cocytus entered as the wax cooled and bowed. Slow and deliberate, the motion of a glacier remembering how to move. Your approach to the lizardman tribes, he said to Naruto, voice like 2 swords agreeing to disagree, has my respect. We'll see if it earns theirs, Naruto said. Respect that doesn't survive a lean winter was worship, not policy. Ainz laughed, a soft sound like a ribbon tied in an empty room. Summarize your pursuit plan. Naruto reached for the rumor map. He didn't redraw it. He shifted a single piece, a wooden token carved in the shape of a coin purse, from one city to the edge of a marsh. Hem there, he said. Don't catch. Leave a mouth. I want him to believe his choice still belongs to him when he makes it. You're playing him, Demiurge murmured, pleased. In my house. I'm stealing your snacks, Naruto said. You can still cook the meal. They moved. Ainz made 3 quiet orders and the world outside the table stood up to obey them. Albedo's displeasure went into logistics. Which was the way she apologized for opinions. Demiurge's fingers laced, a cathedral of knuckles. Naruto took Lupus Regina and 2 invisible things Aura set on his shoulders like shawls that watched over his ears. He left through a side door because he liked side doors. Main doors expected too much of a person. Night met them 2 hours before the city did. They walked into the marsh without waiting for light to ask permission. The sky wore thin cloud like a shawl tugged low over its shoulders. Reeds rasped. Something enormous turned in black water with the dignity of an old priest shifting on a bench. Foreboding. Lupus Regina sang. Accurate, Naruto said. Clones fanned out. He made fewer than he used to. This world's magic tangled oddly with his chakra, and numbers weren't always an answer when the air itself had an opinion. But the ones he made were smart. Smarter than they looked, which was saying something. Each one carried a faint brush of wind at the palm, a lantern you couldn't see unless you were lost. He found the courier's trail thin and taut, like a wire someone had stretched between the tops of reeds so they could cross without touching the water. Clever. He smiled and set his foot on the wire. You didn't break a man's road if you wanted him to lead you. The marsh had a sense of humor it used on strangers. Twice, the ground suggested itself as a good idea and N remembered it was a rumor and went away. Naruto took the hint. He kept wait where the reeds were thickest and trusted the way frogs fell silent when something rude approached. Twice, that saved him. And once it made him look at nothing so hard that the nothing decided to become a trap and then was too embarrassed to spring. They reached a low rise of dirt studded with stones like teeth. The tones were carved with words that didn't remember what they meant. A lantern swung there, shielded on 3 sides. The courier crouched below it, panting. He had thrown his cloak aside. Light didn't need him anymore. He held something small in his hand, a bead that glowed brief as a firefly and then went dark, a message eaten and sent. On the count of, Lupus Regina began. Wait, Naruto said. The courier swallowed and stood. No courage now, only momentum. He walked into a thicket and whispered 3 syllables that wanted to be holy and then thought better of it. A door in the thicket turned into a door. As they did for the right password. He went through. Naruto followed on the second breath. The door took him at his word because the word he used was not the courier's but another one, an OL. Word he had learned in a stone hallway by listening to how air sounded when it was told not to go somewhere. He stepped into a cellar that had never known light it didn't pay for. The room smelled like old leather. Shelves wore the wrong books. Ledgers pretending to be prayer. A table held a map that had learned shame and folded itself in the middle. The courier knelt without being told. Across the table, a man in a gray mantle and hardware smile did not look up from his work. "You were followed," the man said. "No," the courier said, which was a kind of prayer in a room like this. "Yes," Naruto said, which was a less polite prayer. The gray-mantled man lifted his eyes. There were too many languages in them and none of them bothered to say hello. He did not reach for a weapon. He reached for a tiny bell on the table and pushed it with a knuckle. The bell did not ring the way bells did. It sank into the table and turned the table into a different table where certain kinds of sound left and did not return. "Seal," the man said. "Speak if you want to die loud." "Quiet's fine," Naruto said, and stepped sideways into the shadow of a shelf. Lupus Regina did not come through. She waited where he had told her. Counting backwards from a number that meant, "If I don't return by this, pretend the world ended and do what you like." "You're the storm," the man said. "The other throne's lightning." "I'm somebody who hates wasted chances," Naruto said, remembering the shape of that answer because it fit too many questions. He lifted his hands, palms open. "Your mask fits well. Tell me your name anyway." "Names have owners," the man said. "We keep them safe." He considered Naruto like a craftsman weighing a flawed tool he might still find a use for. "Black Scripture will be pleased. They enjoy stubborn prey." The hardware smile tilted. "You have a habit of turning my baits into sermons." "I have no interest in mercy as policy. I have no interest in fear as a shortcut," Naruto said. "How many villages do you think you can pound flat before the ground refuses the hammer?" "Until the hammer breaks," the man said lightly. "Or until the hand grows wiser." Naruto's wind moved without waking. Papers along the shelf lifted a little and then lay back down, like grass breathes under a wind that never admits to being there. The gray-mantled man did not see it. He had human eyes. Why were good for faces and worse for weather? "Custodians," Naruto said. He said it like a test. The man's mouth twitched like a bird when the cage cover lifts. "You plan to null the thrones. You plan to meet a thief," the man said. "You met a locksmith." Naruto moved first because letting men like this talk was how cities burned while you nodded. He crossed the space and hit nothing. The man was not where he had been because the room had been wrong about how it held him. The bell in the table was the room telling itself a story about where things were permitted to be. The gray-mantled man appeared behind Naruto with a knife that did not look like a world item but had the arrogance of one. Naruto didn't play fair with knives. He used the table. He picked up the table with both hands and gave it to the man. Who died under the weight of his own furniture. He should have, anyway. He bent where the table arrived and the table became a different table that missed him and hit the floor hard enough to regret learning carpentry. Naruto's palm hit a sigil on wood and fed it wind. The sigil tried to eat something else and choked. He stepped into the choke and got his hand around the man's wrist. Now the knife had to choose between giving up or drawing a line through two of Naruto's fingers. It made a third choice and became powder. Not world item. Good news. The man laughed once, an admission. "Custodians," he said again. As if saying a word made a throne shake. "The empty throne keeps the world civilized. Your kind break it." "My kind," Naruto said. "Gods," the man said. He didn't spit, but the word behaved like he had. "Or the ones who pretend they aren't until it's convenient." Naruto tightened his grip. "Not cruel, just final. You're buying relics from dead places and teaching traps to blink," he said. "You don't get to speak for the living. We keep what we can," the man said. "The choir sings to people who want to be saved from the kind of mercy that kills late instead of early." Naruto's other hand brushed the man's shoulder and left a second tag, a tiny gift, shaped like regret. "You've got two corridors," he said quietly. "One ends with you making better choices. The other ends with you out of breath and me more annoyed. Choose." The man looked at the courier, who looked at the floor. He smiled without humor. "I walk before I kneel. Then run," Naruto said, and opened his hand. The man took 3 steps into the door he'd made of a wall and left with the bell's help. That was fine. The tags would stay and talk softer than he could. Naruto gestured once, and the room forgot it had been a room that kept sound. He brought the courier to his feet with less force than the moment deserved. "Your name," he said. "Ren," the courier said, surprised how quickly he had given it away. "Names have owners," Naruto said. "Take care of yours. If you want to leave the choir, ask for me at the West Granary of Rantel on a market day. If you want to stay with them, don't get caught." He tapped the side of his head. "If you want to live, don't lie to yourself about what you do." He went out into the marsh and found Lupus Regina still counting aloud in a sing-song that would have made a grave dance. 63. "Still here," Naruto said. "Yay," she said. "Your hands smell like old wood. Did you hit someone with a table?" "I advised them with a table," Naruto said, and she actually clapped. They came back to Nazarick at an angle that made distance unreasonable. The corridors were calmer. Albedo's signature, order, and the edge of anger honed into Yuzfu. LNESS, lay over everything like a geometric lace. Demiurge's structures had already reached out to toy with 3 merchant houses and find out which one liked listening more than thinking. Cocytus was a patient knife somewhere below. Mare slept leaning against a wall. He woke with a start when Naruto passed and blushed so strongly it made the air warmer. In the throne room, Ainz sat under the same flame, which meant time had looped back to where it had started because the world enjoyed symmetry when it didn't have wars to fight. "You look like someone who found a new problem to enjoy," Ainz said. "Found somebody else enjoying it," Naruto said. "Put a string on him." Ainz said, which was a language. "Albedo informed me of your clause. Demiurge is modeling before and after rebellions." He gestured at 2 little stacks of markers on a table beside the throne. "He predicts a reduction in long-tail uprisings by 23% with your policy enacted." 23's an ugly number, Naruto said. "Let's fix that." Ainz's hand lifted, bones clicking faintly as they settled. "Is your mercy a tactic?" he asked, and somehow made it sound like a question from a teacher who wanted to be surprised. "It's a habit," Naruto said, settling on the step below the thrones, where the light bled less. "Tactics grow on it when it's planted in the right soil." Ainz was quiet for a moment. "You draw maps of people," he said. "I draw maps of information. Between us we might assemble a landscape." "Between us," Naruto agreed. "We might make it worth living on." Albedo's anger cooled int. Oh, something he could walk on without slipping. She approached and knelt with controlled grace. "Lord Ainz. Lord Naruto. The mercy clause has been circulated to commanders. Cocytus has acknowledged receipt." Her eyes flicked to Naruto. Not fond but not hostile. There was room in her ledger for results. "Good," Naruto said. "Thank you." She blinked once, as if the words fit poorly in the mouth of a man who kept making her adapt. She bowed and left. They sat alone with the flame and the sound of stone making up its mind to hold together for another night. "I'll need to go to the lake soon," Naruto said. Not to fill silence but because he liked talking when it meant something. "Before somebody with a crown decides to make a desert with oars." Ainz's teeth didn't shift in their smile because they weren't meant to. Instead, the air around his skull softened the way it did when he was privately pleased. "Your phrasing is terrible." "Thank you," Naruto said. "I practice." They had tea then. Beck. Oz rulers needed rituals that reminded them they were alive, even when one of them wasn't. Naruto didn't speak of the bell or the man who used the room like a pocket hiccuping wrong. He had already told Ainz. In all the ways that mattered. The map adjusted, a piece moved, the air in the room changed its temperature. They shared a quiet presence without having to lace it with words. Far from Nazarick, down a ladder into a cellar with too much prayer and too little light, a man in a gray mantle pressed his fingers against a chalk smear on his arm and hissed softly. The chalk had no right to be there. It itched like a conscience. A figure in a white hood looked up from a table where rows of polished metal segments lay like a broken bracelet learning to remember itself. Eyes like a winter SK. "Why considered the man and found him insufficient?" "You were followed," the figure said. "Tagged," the man admitted. "Remove it," the figure said. "It is stubborn." He swallowed and shrugged, the motion small. "The storm touched me. The storm, the figure said, and something in the room bent its knee. A player, then. Something adjacent, the man said. He speaks like a man and chooses like a god who hasn't learned fear. The figure's hand hovered over the metal. One segment quivered, two yearning ends found each other and clicked. The sound was gentle, a moth's wings landing on a candle flame. The man flinched anyway. Custodians will convene, the figure said. Once the null crown is whole, thrones will be emptied, and the world will breathe without the smell of divinity. Sing to the choir. We'll need ears. And if the storm doesn't sit for the song? The man asked. The figure didn't answer. The candle did. It went out without smoke, and darkness laid its hands back across the RO. Own like a blanket for a child you didn't love enough to wake. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Oaths in the wheat. The wheat woke first. It rubbed gold against itself in the dawn, made a dry music, and stretch. Ed out in every direction like a sea that had decided to stay. A scarecrow hunched at the border of one field, wearing a hat that had been more jokes than straw for 3 harvests now. The fence bested. It had 3 broken panels where last week's night stole a cow. Naruto put his palm on a post and pushed. Wood protested and then remembered it had always wanted to stand. He wedged a brace, wrapped a rope, and leaned back, letting the knot tighten around the idea of upright. Heroic, Lupus Regina said, dangling a bucket on 2 fingers like a girl too rich to carry it properly. She wore the kind of smile that made people trust her and small animals leave. Fences are honest, Naruto said, testing the flex. They want to do one thing and they do it in plain sight. Like me, she said brightly. Then laughed because they both knew better. They'd come before the sun, cloaks dusty, gear quiet. No banners, no herald. Ainz had drafted a note that described them as adventurers of polite competence. Stamped with the kind of seal that meant you could ask questions later if you lived. Naruto tucked it in his vest and went to meet people as if he had nothing else to do. The headman had a bet. Hat than the scarecrow but the same patched pride. He arrived with a wicker ledger under his arm and a boy who stared at Naruto like a miracle you could trip over. He looked at Lupus Regina, decided she was probably a saint, and hid behind her skirt anyway. We don't have coin for hire, the headman said, careful with truth and the way it wore his teeth. I'm fixing your fence because it's broken, Naruto said. If I wanted to be paid, I'd have waited to do it while you looked. The headman's mouth tried not to smile and failed. He stuck out a hand. Naruto took it. The grip was grain dust and work. They walked the fields. A woman with arms like braided rope kneaded dough at a table set up on a cart. She cut a loaf, tossed a heel at Naruto, then pointed at his vest without asking. He dropped 2 silver into her bowl without telling the coins not to shine. People watched him pay. People remembered that kind of thing when harder things asked for their attention. The headman started. As if naming a co-ruler to his face might turn the morning into a different kind of day. Nobody you owe, Naruto said. Today, I'm a customer and a pair of hands. You've got taxes too heavy and bandits too curious. We can fix one by the end of the week if you help. What about the other? The headman asked. Not breaking when they push, Naruto said. That takes longer. We'll start now. He did not give a speech. He made a map with his body. He put a clone at the mill with a small purse and told it to buy the first sack of flour from anyone who brought one on time. He sent another to play with children in the square with colored chalk that turned into lines only soldiers would understand. He posted a third at the well to hand cups to old men with shaky hands and asked them where the water ran weird when it rained. Hard news traveled fastest in cups and chalk. The wind filled the rest. Lupus Regina drifted like sunshine on a floor. She pinched cheeks, adjusted a bandage on a boy's knee with hands that smelled faintly of herbs and of something sharp as ice. The boy stopped crying and then noticed her eyes and cried again because they were too red to be allowed. She laughed, kissed his forehead, and the boy decided saints were probably allowed oddities. By noon, the village had decided Naruto ate like a man, worked like a son, and paid like trouble. By afternoon, word traveled. Ed down a road nobody had paved. They were seen. Not by bandits. When the sun went behind the water tower for a moment and pretended to be evening, a little bell at the chapel rang 3 times. It had always rung 3 times for wedding. Twice for fire. once for birth. 3 meant celebration or something pretending to be 1. The headman's wife set down her ladle with the care you used for hot IR. On and walked toward the square without looking back to see who followed. People did. Naruto's clones vanished with soft pops and their knowledge came home to him on a strand of thought. The square been swept recently by somebody who understood what floors meant. A banner hung over the steps to the chapel. White cloth, gold stitching, a sunburst that wanted to say, morning, and ended up saying, mandate. 7 people stood beneath it, and none of them wore dirt. Only one of them looked like she was allowed to feel anything about it. Nia Baraha held her bow the way people held truth, too firmly at first. Then with a rueful ease when it didn't break. She was younger than the hardness in her mouth, older than the orders that had made her stand here and think the right thoughts. Her eyes went long distance when she listened. She was listening now, she just hadn't admitted it. The man beside her wore scripture on his sleeves and steel on his hands. He had the kind of jaw nobody had told no before. He lifted a rod in a gloved grip and spoke as if speaking had weight. By authority of the slain theocracy, he said, the rod ringing a syllable into the ground, we've come to offer the protection of the Faith Father. Bandits have been emboldened. Certain malignant influences spread. We will cleanse and guard. He turned his head, found Naruto without needing to be told, and smiled. It did not reach his eyes because it didn't have to. We invite all strangers to kneel during the blessing, he said, almost kind. Naruto raised a hand like a student who'd done the homework. I'm terrible at kneeling, he said. Bad knee. Quote. Lupus Regina coughed delicately into a fist. The man with the rod. He had a name. Naruto did not ask for it because he'd stop listening if he got it, lifted 2 fingers. The air around the square thickened like something trying to be syrup and failing. A circle of light wrote itself on the ground, lines forming with a calligrapher's smugness. The villagers gasped because the circle didn't stop at the edge of the square. It slid under doors and around barrels and drew a ring around the entire village with a neatness that made Naruto respect the craft. Stay within the light, the man said. Those who are named may step out when called. Others will wait. It is for your safety. He smiled again with his jaw. The world is loud at night. You will be quiet. Ah. Lupus Regina breathed, pleased. A cage that tells you it's a cradle. Nia's eyes flicked to the circle, back to Naruto, then studiously to the rod. She didn't know him, but she knew danger when it smiled. Her voice was low enough for only 2 people to hear. This is only until the sweep is completed, she said, and it sounded like she was arguing with herself. Please let it be. Naruto tipped his chin at the bakery cart, where 2 boys had climbed the wheel and were trying to reach a loaf with eyes that never stopped bouncing. They can't sleep if they're penned, he said simply. Nobody can. Panic does more damage than swords. They'll be safer, the man with the rod said loudly, hearing what he wanted. Safer than you ever make them, stranger. The safest a field ever feels is the second before locusts come. Naruto said. He stepped forward and the circle of light decided to be interesting. It tightened against his ankle like a polite hand trying to keep a guest. He smiled, leaned down, and tapped the light with a knuckle. Syllables ran through it like birds startled out of a bush. He listened. He wasn't listening for words. Words lied. He listened for the gap that had to exist in any rhythm that wanted to breathe. There it was. 4 heartbeats steady, a pause thin as paper, 3, pause, 5, 2, long. A hymn stitched by an accountant. He laughed softly. You wrote this with numbers, he said. That's cute. Respect the sanctity, the man snapped, which was a way of announcing he didn't build the thing he stood under. Nia watched Naruto's hands. They didn't flash signs, not exactly. He moved them like a person counting beats in a song only he heard. He put his heel on the circle on the second pause and half-stepped. The light didn't object because it was busy finishing the previous number. He slid his other foot on the 2 beat. The circle missed him twice, decided he didn't exist for 1 breath, and he was out. A murmur ran through the square lightning that had been taught manners. Nia bit the inside of her cheek to keep from smiling. The rod man didn't. He scowled and half-raised his weapon. Don't, Naruto said lightly. There are children in the splash. If you're going to make a point, make it somewhere else. The rod man swallowed irritation and revisited smile. Of course, he said, and then raised the rod higher than a kindness needed. We will conduct the blessing. Bandits will be drawn by hunger. Demons. His eyes slid back to Naruto, who had never looked less like a demon than he did standing there with flower dust on his sleeve, by pride. We will cleanse. His people fanned. 3 pulled out relics that looked like jewelry and not instruments. They were both. One woman in a pale hood held a case that sang when she opened it. It sang just loud enough that Naruto's skull signed a complaint. Lupus Regina's head tilted, amused. They're tuning, she said. Naruto said, and pointed at danger the way you point out a puddle to a child. 2 men had detached from the theocracy group and walked casual toward the mill, too casual, hands free, eyes soft. Vault, he said to himself, and split. 5 clones appeared, one mid-sneeze because he liked startling himself now and then. He swatted the sneezing one in the head, it grinned and sprinted. 2 more loped toward the mill, shouting about a bag of grain that a mouse in it as if this were thrilling news. The last 2 started arguing in the square about which of them looked more like an idiot, which gave an old man with no teeth something to laugh about. Which gave a girl who'd been holding her breath since the bell a reason to breathe. The rod man began his blessing. The light strands braided tighter, then relaxed to inhale the villagers, quiet. That was the trick. The circle wanted silence like a jealous lover. Noise made it stumble. Keep their mouths busy, Naruto said to Lupus Regina under his breath. With bread, she said sweetly, and started handing out slices with the speed of a miracle and the efficiency of a quartermaster. She told jokes that would have gotten her slapped in a polite church and laughed at the right time. People's mouths moved. The circle complained. Nia's superior. He had a rank, he'd remind you if you forgot, stepped to her side. Eyes on the stranger, he murmured. He is the sort who ruins plans by smiling. She kept her eyes on the horizon where the fields met a dirt road. Dust rose. 4 riders. Behind them, men on foot in leather that had never fit and swords that had learned to share hands. Bandits didn't like plans. They liked appetites. Approach, she said. The rod man beamed like a man who'd set a trap and seen a rabbit volunteer. Behold, he said for the crowd. Providence brings the wicked to our light. Nia's jaw tightened. Providence didn't usually smell like fear and hunger and someone who hadn't laughed in a year. Naruto moved. He didn't draw a blade. He picked up one of the children, hanging on the cart and put her on the steps of the chapel, pressed a sweet roll in her palm, then turned to the bakery woman. Put your table behind the well, he said. Men hide behind food better. She blinked, then dragged the table, swearing at the wheel the way old friends swore at each other. Naruto's clones fanned, became delivery boys, became lazy cousins, became people who didn't look like soldiers until they needed to. The bandits came up to the circle and hesitated. They knew a cage when they saw one. They also knew a town that smelled like bread and coin and fear. The leader spat, hitched up his belt as if that might make his courage taller, and stepped toward the light. Nia drew on instinct. The bow came up and the arrow lay along her knuckles like a thought. She did not loose. Orders had timing. Her superior's breaths counted them. 4. Now, hold, Naruto said softly, not to her, just to air. Then louder, and with a different kind of softness. Hey, the bandit leader looked like a man whose nose had once been broken by somebody she had liked a lot less. He saw Naruto and spat again. Toll, he said, because some words did their own thinking. 10 coins ahead. Make it 0 and you live, Naruto said. Because some sentences did, too. Or, the leader said, trying on humor like a jacket that didn't fit, we burn your god circle and you pay us to go away. The rod man lifted his staff. The circle hissed approval in 1,000 lines of light. Nia's arrow pulled itself tighter on the string as if gravity had found a new hobby in her shoulders. She saw the looks on the faces behind the bandits, the ones without horses, the ones with the wrong shoes. Starvelings, a woman with a sick baby, a boy with a scabbed lip. The wrong kind of army, which was to say the real kind. Naruto didn't look at the staff. He looked at the boy with the scabbed lip and said, "You hungry?" The boy's chin went up. "No." "Good," Naruto said, and tossed him a roll. The boy missed it on purpose. Naruto's clone caught it, bowed, tossed it back. The boy almost smiled and remembered who he was supposed to be. The rod man raised the staff higher. The light thickened. The bandit Eater took that as a challenge and took a step into the circle. The circle bit him. His scream was the first honest thing he'd done all week. Mercy, the rod man said loudly, as if the word belonged to him. Kneel and live, resist and be purified. That was the moment plans usually broke. The bandits, second, he had better eyes, saw the trick. The light wasn't for demons or mercy. It was for control. He shoved his leader backward, ripped a relic off his own wrist, and threw it hard into the air. It detonated in a spill of white that flattened sound. The circle staggered. The staff's song missed a note. The second man screamed something guttural and the footmen rushed. Everything became hands in motion. Naruto didn't pull chakra up like a river. He opened as if he'd been stitched wrong and a seam slid for a second. Wind came through. He didn't make it a blade. He made it a nudge. He pushed at people who were in the wrong place and moved them toward right ones. 3 children ended up behind the well without noticing how. 2 women found themselves beside the chapel door with it already open. A man who had been about to be brave and die instead stumbled into a friend's arms and became usefully angry. A relic sang from the hooded woman's case. The song was designed to settle like ash in lungs. Lupus Regina inhaled it, smiled, and let it out again as something that smelled like clover. The nearest bandit blinked tears out of his eyes and forgot to be afraid because fear couldn't get purchase on a smell like that. Nia took the shot she'd been pretending not to hold. It hummed paw, saint the rod man's shoulder and pinned the relic thrower's sleeve to the post behind him. He swore in a way that made his mother feel less guilty from 10 towns over. Naruto heard the staff's hymn falter again and timed his body into the gap. He stepped through the circle and it forgot he had a right to exist. He liked when plans did that. The black scripture cell. There were 5, not 7, 2 W.E. theater to make the circle look larger than it was, shifted. The man with the rod grimaced, flicked a switch near the hilt. Syllables went from forgiving to surgical. Lines of light stood up like iron bars. Naruto put his palm against a bar and felt it hum against his bones. He waited for the long breath in the pattern that would never come if this had been built by a musician. It came, thin as tea. He sighed of a disappointed bookkeeper. After the 4, after the 3, a fraction meant for someone fast and bored. Lupus, he said, laugh. She did. It was bright, genuine, and it came from her stomach. The circle, trained to bank on quiet, missed a step. Naruto pushed wind into the absence and made a doorway. He didn't make it obvious. He made it a wrongness in the world that only he could walk through because he had decided he could. He walked. The rod man swung for his temple. Naruto managed not to be where the swing belonged, caught the shaft half a foot below the singing tip, and pinned it against the floorboards. The floor didn't like it and squeaked. Naruto's heel made the squeak into a narrow wail song that scrambled the relic's note for a heartbeat. He looked up into the ROD man's eyes because that was where men kept good information and said, stop. The rod man stopped. It wasn't magic. It was instruction, delivered like you deliver a mug to a man whose hand has never not taken one. Nia put a second arrow into a bandit's boot heel and another into the loop of a relic's chain, snapping it off before it could open again. She did not shoot to kill. She shot at thin GS that made killing easier for other people. It felt like treason to every order she'd obeyed this month. It felt correct in her bones. A woman with a veil slipped past a panicking mother toward the cart where the ledger sat. She wasn't looking at bread. She was looking at signatures. Lupus Regina moved without moving and was standing with a hand on the ledger a second later, smiling, and asking, "Are you enjoying the market?" "I am. We have samples." The veiled woman smiled back because her face had muscles and habits. Her hand flinched. Lupus Regina's smile widened in that way that promised a good mood and a missing finger if the hand didn't go somewhere else. It did. The bandit leader, still shaking his burned foot, tried to be brave again. Naruto walked into him with the inevitability of gravity, took his wrist, and showed him, gently, how a wrist decides it would rather not hold a knife anymore. The knife fell. Nia's arrow thunked into the post, making a friend of the knife and the wood. Lupus Regina tore strips of cloth from the leader's belt and bandaged the burned ankle the circle had given him. He looked at her, confused. She winked, and the tiny bit of human the world had left him remembered warmth. The hooded woman in charge of the case understood then. Not about mercy, about target selection. She changed the song. It went from soft ash to ringing ice, to seize the divin signature in the square and freeze it for naming. Her eyes found Naruto. The case screamed a note meant to slice everything blew out of the air. Nia saw it coming. So did Naruto. He didn't dodge. He blew. A gust, tight as a drill, twisted the slice a hair. It cut through the top of a stall instead of his skull. The stall gave a protest offended enough to be funny later. Now, not so much. The R.O.D. man recovered his posture like a man who had practiced it. He prepared to announce victory and consecration in whatever order his training manual thought would make people more pliable. Naruto let go of his staff and stepped back into the circle as if it had asked him nicely. The village is not your stage, Naruto said. He spoke loudly enough that the square was forced to eavesdrop. You'll do your sweep outside. We'll handle inside. The theocracy's mandate. The rod man began. Isn't a broom, Naruto said. You don't get to sweep people. You get to face threats. So face me. He lifted his hands. Empty. You want a prize. Here's one. Take it outside the circle where nobody bleeds because they believed you. The rod man wanted to say yes because that was the shape his pride had dreamed of all its life. He looked at the civilians watching him not as a holy man but as a neighbor. He swallowed. His orders said one thing. The eyes that kept his country from becoming a church said another. The hooded woman cut the argument by raising her hand. Our sweep is done, she said, which was a lie, but an efficient one. No demon presence within the boundary. We depart. She snapped the case, the song died, and the circle dimmed to a necklace of lines that didn't have the energy to strangle anything. The rod man looked like a man who had just lost a duel he hadn't fought. Nia lowered her bow last. Her superior shot her a glance that promised a conversation about obedience. She accepted it and steadied the next breath anyway. The bandits went, those who could. Two could not. One was the leader, ankle-wrapped. The other was the boy with the scabbed lip, who had realized you could put bread down but couldn't remember how to leave without turning around twice. Naruto put a coin in the boy's palm. Go somewhere you can align a fence plank without crying, he said gently. You know where that is. The boy swallowed, nodded, and ran. The leader looked at Lupus Regina's neat banda. Like it insulted him by being competent. Naruto watched the dust settle and then climbed the 3 chapel steps slowly, like a man counting blessings he hadn't asked for. He knelt. Not to pray, to write. He pulled a rolled parchment from his vest and smoothed it with 2 fingers. The headman stood at his shoulder like a minor storm, pride, worry, hope. This is a contract, Naruto said, as if he were explaining the way a plow goes into earth. It says what we pay, what you pay. We protect, you feed. If we fail, you owe nothing. If you fail, you tell us so we can help you stand straighter next time. He tapped a line halfway down. Mercy clause. Anyone who surrenders in a fight under our flag gets a corridor and bread. Doesn't erase crimes. Does prevent stupid tragedy. We built it that way. Who is we? The headman asked without rancor, precisely so he'd know where to send his anger next time. 2 rulers, Naruto said. The other one does paperwork. Be kind to him. It's hard. He stamped the contract with a small travel signet bearing a simplified sigil of a skull and a leaf. The wax smelled like cold iron and rosemary. Lupus Regina raised an eyebrow. Fancy. Ainz got bored last week, Naruto said. Designed seals until the ink reminded him of the old days. He turned the parchment for the headman. The man traced the word, bread, like a name. He took the quill, signed with care, and then stood straighter because sometimes honor was a piece of paper you didn't crumple. Nia approached as the crowd thinned into curiosity and the smell of stew. She had put her bow across her back and lost some of the stiffness in her shoulders. Up close, she had a way of holding her chin that made Naruto want to lower it with a joke and a thumb. He didn't. You, she said, then stop. Head because words like saved and interfered were lining up to fight in her mouth. You made it harder to make a mistake. Good, he said. Next time it will be easy to make the right choice. She snorted. You sound like a poster. Bad knee, he said. Can't kneel to paint them. Her mouth betrayed her and curled. The smile transformed her like sunrise transforms a field. It also made her Elise. She was smiling at a co-ruler of a tomb that made people whisper prayers into their sleeves. She sobered. You could have killed them, she said. I still can, he said, without heat. I prefer returns on my investments. You treat people like. She began, then stopped again, because finishing with grain would be an insult and neighbors would be a vow. Like they matter, he offered. Even when I pay for it later. You will, she said, looking past him to the road the theocracy cell took. They don't like being shown up. I'm not performing, he said. I'm tired of standing in the audience while the wrong play runs. She looked at the contract again. Can I read this? You can tell me where it lies, he said. I prefer honest edits. She scanned. Her finger hovered over the part where failure was admitted publicly. Where breaches of the mercy clause forfeited pay for a season. You put your own throat in here, she said. Better than tying someone else's, he said. What's your name? She hesitated, then decided not telling it was worse than hiding in the wrong crowd. Nia Baraha. Nia, he said, trying the weight. I'm Naruto. Aim true, even if it's at me someday. That's a stupid thing to say to an archer, she said, and then realized it wasn't. It was trust before a contract. He left her with the parchment and went to the mill, where his clones were very earnestly arguing with a man about the weight of flour, as if flour had feelings to be soothed. On the road out of the village, the theocracy cell walked in a line made of professional resentment. The hooded woman held the case on her hip. The rod man walked stiff. Nia's superior walked beside her and said, You embarrassed us. I kept people alive, she said. She didn't say, in a way our God will approve of, because she had learned to be careful how often she put heaven in her mouth around men with rods. Next time, obey, he said. Next time, she said, and smiled pleasantly at the horizon. He didn't ask what that meant. Evening found the square quieter for the first time that day. Naruto sat on the chapel steps and counted the breaths between someone's laugh and someone else's. He wrote three names in a notebook with his thumb. The bandit boy, the woman with the sick baby, the miller who needed a new belt in a week. He put the book away. Lupus Regina leaned against the door like AC. At that had been given a church and found it acceptable. You made a friend, she said, not unkind. I made a colleague, he said. Friendship takes longer. I've been wrong about that before. You're often right, she said. Annoying, isn't it? Delicious, she said, eyes glinting. A rider came at a walk as the sky went from yellow to the color of a bruise you'd forgotten. He wore no crest. His horse had been brushed by somebody who loved it. He carried a case wrapped in cloth. He dismounted with the care of a man whose knees reminded him of rain. He asked for the headman. He asked for a room in the back of the chapel. He asked for nothing else. Naruto didn't follow immediately. He waited the 3 beats a cautious man would wait and then went around the back where the wall had a knot a mason had loved too much to smooth. Inside, the rider unwrapped the case. Metal gleamed in segments like a bracelet for a giant. He fitted 2 pieces together with a click that sounded like the last W. Word of a prayer that didn't mean what people thought it meant. The headman, who had been invited to watch the miracle of donation, swallowed. What is it? He asked softly. A relic to keep you safe, the rider said. And his eyes did not blink because blinking would have admitted he was lying. Naruto couldn't see the metal, he felt it. He felt the way the room leaned toward it, as if gravity had opinions now. He felt the way his sage sense prickled as if it had teeth and was embarrassed to show them. He thought of the gray-mantled man in the cellar last night and of the word custodians. He CKED and entered like a man less important than he was. The rider looked up. He saw hair, eyes, the kind of smile that made reasonable people leave trouble alone. He also saw something larger if he had the right kind of sight, and he did. He did not flinch. He inclined his head. Evening, Naruto said. That looks heavy. Need a hand. Some burdens are meant to be carried alone, the rider said with pleasant sadness. Naruto stepped closer. The metal made his skin want to crack. He did not itch. He smiled instead. What do you call it? A gift, the writer said. From friends. I don't take gifts I can't return, Naruto said. Keeps the books easier. Then consider it a loan, the writer said. Until men who inherited thrones they didn't build stop playing God with people they didn't make. The headman flinched as if he'd been slapped. Naruto did not. People make themselves, he said lightly. We're just here to keep the lights on and the knives out of the pantry. You are not a candle, the writer said. He looked at Naruto's hands, as if they were guilty of something. You're a storm with legs. Accurate, Lupus Regina said, appearing in the doorway like a scent. He never stops raining on my jokes. Naruto let the metal rest on the table without touching it again. He did not know all its names. He knew one. Crown. He knew another. Null. The case hummed softly like a choir th. Had forgotten the words and liked harmony too much to admit it. Leave it, Naruto said. Generous, the writer said, amused. You know what it does. It makes us lazy, Naruto said. And then dead. We're trying not to be either this month. It makes you honest, the writer said, and for the first time the pleasantness in his voice stripped away and there was a hard machine underneath. It peels your pretense from your bones and shows the world what you are when the glow is gone. Naruto tilted his head. You think glow is pretense, he said, as if tasting a soup. We think it's a promise. They looked at each other and did not agree. The writer wrapped the case in cloth with the tenderness of a man closing a coffin. He carried it past Naruto with care, as if the co-ruler might do so. Weird and polite to his neck if he didn't. He mounted, thanked the headman for the water he had not drunk, and rode out. He did not press his horse. He rode like a man certain he'd be followed anyway and curious to see who would bother. Naruto did not follow. He stood a while with his palms on the edge of the table and listened to the quiet of a chapel that had seen too many games played on its floor. Night slid in neatly. Lamps came out. People went home, carrying stories with their bread. Naruto rolled up the contract and tucked it into the chapel ledger, not to hide it but to put it where. It would make copies of itself in people's heads. Nia found him later at the well, washing flour off his forearms with water that felt like old stone remembering rain. I read it, she said, gesture. With her chin toward the ledger where the contract slept. Did it lie? He asked. It demanded, she said. Fairly. That's rarer than piety. She stood with her hands quiet at her sides, the bow line across her back that made her look like a question mark that had decided to be a person. I want to come with you. To do what? He asked. He didn't say. Why? Reasons were for evening. Work was for morning. To stop bad plays, she said. Or write better ones. You'll take orders when we have to not die, he said. You'll argue when we don't. You'll aim true, even if I'm wrong. Especially then. Yes, she said. That was the right answer, and it was brisk without being brittle. Then one more thing, he said, and his voice went softer not because he wanted to be kind but because he wanted to be heard. They will call me worse than I am. They will call Ainz worse than he is. If you have to pick a name to believe, pick the one the baker's wife uses when she has burned the loaf and can't afford to tell herself a pretty lie. She calls you the man who paid first, Nia said, and smiled despite herself. I can work with that. They shook hands. Hers was dry and cooler than Lupus Regina's. He felt the pull of a different world in it. The one where oaths were made intense with cold rain leaking through and men smiling because a woman with a bow had promised to be there tomorrow. Ainz listened that night to a summary delivered without fanfare. They didn't give him the smell of bread, the way the light bent in honest homes, or the way Nia squinted when she decided a joke was worth smiling at. They gave him numbers and the shape of a contract. He took them like a builder takes measurements, not like a king takes tribute. Black scripture, he said thoughtfully when Naruto mentioned the circle. Their equipment. Neat, Naruto said, overconfident. Tuned for quiet. Don't invite them to dinner. Albedo's mouth thinned when she heard about the contract. We charge too little, she said. If we mean to keep roads, walls, men paid. We bill long tail, Naruto said. First we have to keep them alive enough to pay it. Demiurge steepled fingers, which was never not worrying. I've updated 3 models, he said amiably. like a man announcing a new pie. Your policy reduces midterm resistance by 23% across 3 provinces. 31 If we lean into rumor casting that your kindness is a calculated weapon. We don't rumor cast, Naruto said. We do, Ainz said mildly, because rulers sometimes did favors without calling them favors. People will call it propaganda whether we do it or not. Best we steer it toward truth and away from idolatry. Albedo, codify the mercy clause for border operations. Demiurge, adapt messaging. No statues. No statues. Demiurge agreed, disappointed. Then, back to mild happy menace. Perhaps tasteful broadsheets. Lupus Regina flopped into a chair like a cat. He hit a man with a table, she reported. In case we're doing highlights. Ainz looked as if he wanted to ask for detail and then remembered he didn't have the facial muscles to enjoy it. Acceptable, he said, which was his way of saying he wished he'd seen it. Naruto told him about the rider and the metal that hummed like a hive under a hand. Ainz went very still and the temperature in the room dropped a degree as his mind shuffled through old names and rare shapes. A segment of something, he said, voiced the crisp edge of parchment. A circlet, a dampener, a null crown, Naruto said. Albedo glanced at him. You've heard that name before. From a man who thought chalk was a curse, Naruto said, thinking of the cellar and the box that turned itself into a different box when you weren't looking. Custodians of an empty throne. They have a choir. They buy relics from dead places and tell the living how to behave. Ainz's hand lifted, stilled in the air, and came down. Then we treat them like a guild with a god complex, he said. We price them out of markets where possible, break their logistics where necessary, and show they're the kind of men who would let a village burn so a plan looks cleaner on paper. He looked at Naruto. You like breaking clean lines. I like people more, Naruto said. Ainz laughed without sound. Good. Break some more. Night after that went long. Naruto slept on the floor of a room that had a window because most of Nazarick didn't. And it was good to remember the sky was not a roof. He dreamed he was repairing the fence again and the post he pushed was a spear in a woman's hand, and when it set. A lake out there somewhere nodded in approval. Nia slept in the loft of the mill, bow unstrung beside her, dreams a tangle of light and equations that broke to laughter when a woman with red eyes handed her bread and called her competent. She woke smiling, decided that was disloyal to somebody who frightened her, and smiled again anyway. Loyalty worked better on the people who asked less of it and gave more. The rider who had brought the metal did not sleep here. He slept nowhere. He reached a rendezvous at the edge of a birch grove and found 3 others like him and a 4th who was not like anyone yet still made the air step aside. The Platinum Dragon Lord did not wear a face, he wore an idea. The men bowed. The idea nodded because it recognized that men needed gestures. Did he touch it? A voice asked from a mask that wasn't. He felt it, the rider said. He will be a problem. All things are, the voice said, almost kindly. The crown will be a solution. A masked hand held out a segment. Another piece clicked into it with an obedience that made the night cold. In the sound, a different world stirred like an animal in winter, annoyed to find it had to wake and do a trick. Sing, someone whispered. We will. Another answer came, and if you had been a man with a rod, you would have felt loved. If you had been a woman with a bow, you would have checked your strings. ND slept under a doorway because doors understood choices better than walls. Morning put its hand on the village and everything small and woven about it. The children ran the circle's scar with their fingers and pretended it was a river. The bandit leader stared at his wrapped ankle and had to admit it hurt less than it would have if the lady with red eyes hadn't touched him. He spat anyway. Habits kept you warm. Naruto stood with the headman to count sacks as if counting had ever told anyone the truth about hunger. He signed for 3, promised 5, then swore to stand in front of a gate if a tax collector came with a jaw like a rod. The headman nodded, which was the language of men keeping a ledger for lives. Nia arrived with a small pack and no apology. They looked at each other like people who had chosen the same road and were surprised and relieved to find it had space. Lupus Regina threw her a heel of bread, which Nia caught left-handed without looking. Lupus Regina's grin sharpened. We'll keep you, she said. They set out when the sun was a polite coin. Naruto didn't look back at the fence. He knew where it would bend next time and which boy would fix it. He liked that knowledge more than the thought of victory. They walked into wheat that behaved itself, for now, and toward a road that did not. Somewhere beyond it, a lake remembered a promise. Somewhere above both, an old dragon adjusted his plans. Somewhere far, in a room without windows, a circlet learned the shape of a skull and waited for a head. Naruto walked with his hands in his sleeves because it made certain men underestimate them. Nia walked with her bow unstrung because she liked the way it made her look less ready and therefore more dangerous. Lupus Regina walked like a woman heading to a feast she would set, eat, and bless. Plan? Nia asked, because she knew they didn't need one to start but liked to have one once momentum got bored. 2 maps, Naruto said. Ainz draws the one that tells us where lies go to sleep. I draw the one that tells us where people wake up. We put them on the table and watch which pieces jump. You're different, Nia said softly, almost to the wheat. Everyone's different, he said. I'm just loud about it. She smiled and looked ahead, where the road bent around a grove and the smell of water and lizards came like a promise kept early. She didn't know the names waiting there. She knew she wanted to be standing when she heard them. Behind them, the contract lay in its ledger. It would be argued about at dinner, defended by the baker, resented by a man W. Ho hadn't liked new math since his wife died, and quoted by a girl who liked words more than boys. It had already done its work. Paper was like that, if you wrote people into it and meant it. Somewhere else, in a hall that had taught stone how to listen, Ainz weighed slices of information and smiled a skeletal smile that somehow felt warmer than most men's. He didn't say, good. He didn't need to. The air did when he breathed correctly and you paid attention. He reached for another map, one that traced the places custodians bought relics with hands that didn't shake. He lifted a bone finger and touched 3 cities. Demiurge nodded. Albedo set out the ledger that would take blood and turn it into budget. Cocytus sharpened a blade with patience that had long since turned into ritual, and awed about the lizardmen with respect he hadn't known he owned. Mercy is a tactic, Demiurge murmured, just for himself, like a man tasting a new seasoning. And a habit. Habits become laws, Ainz said, which, around here, was a blessing. Wind crossed the wheat and tousled it like a laughing ant. The scarecrow watched the road and held the line because that's what fences were for. A shadow moved across the fields and there was no bird in the sky to make it. Some shadows learned to walk when ideas did. Naruto glanced up. He kept walking. He smiled without humor or fear because both wore quickly if you took them out every hour. Let them come, he said to nobody and everyone. We'll teach them to blink. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Crown of Scales. The road gave up before the water did. Reeds took the last decisions out of everyone's feet and replaced them with patience. The wetland breathed, a long, old rhythm you felt in your ankles and lower back, the kind of breathing that made you aware of your heartbeat without telling it what to do. Dragonflies wrote their names over the water and pretended they weren't bragging. Smell that, Lupus Regina said, walking heel to toe on a sunken log like a saint daring a sermon to notice. Mud, mint, and old fish. Homie. Nia, bow unstrung over her shoulder, dipped 2 fingers into the water. It came away tea brown, cold as a promise. It hides depth, she said. I like it. Naruto kept his hands inside his sleeves because the reeds were better to talk to if you weren't showing off. Depth likes you too, he said. It always wants company. A dozen paces ahead, the marsh rose into a tongue of ground bands of lizardmen had stamped into a path. The marks were precise, even mud respected certain kinds of order. A stake thrust out of the bank at chest height carried a token of bone, a fish jaw cleaned and painted with 3 lines of ash. Nia touched the air in front of it without touching the bone. Warning, she asked. Welcome, Naruto said, if you're not stupid. Lupus Regina sang, we're doomed. He smiled and stepped onto the path the way you step into a house, wait low, without entitlement. Wind brought high, a handful of scents. Oil rubbed into leather straps, river salt trapped in scales, smoke that had learned to live in wood. Under it all, a complicated quiet, the kind people said over grief when they were done being loud about it. They found the first place where Nazarick's old plan had been measured into the land. The ground sloped just so, the wind shifted at the top of a rise, the water deepened into a black tongue. If you drove the clans here with enough noise, and if you waited until sunset, and if Kokaida's spear lines were drawn to catch the panic. Naruto stopped at the edge of the slope and said, "No." Lupus Regina tilted her head. Nia followed his line of sight and saw how the pieces fit. The stampede paths, the churned mud where feet would slip, the thin bank where those who didn't drown would bunch and be easy to cut down. She'd seen the shape of murders that didn't require cruelty. This was one. It had a clean geometry. He walked down into the trap and planted a stick at the lowest point. It was nothing. Just a branch, stripped of leaves, and it offended the math. Message. Nia asked. Correction. Naruto said. If we don't want to lose to ourselves later. He put a stone beside the stick. Then a second one 2 strides away. He crouched, arms loose, and let the wet earth soak through the knee of his trousers while he squinted at the waterline like a man trying to fix a hinge with his eyes. Changing the lay of land with rocks, Lupus Regina said. You're adorable. Rocks remember, Naruto said. And they persuade. Who? She asked. Everyone, he said, then stood and brushed mud off his palms. Come on. They're watching. They were. First as movement you only saw if you happened to be looking where you weren't meant to, then as silhouettes like carved bone between the reeds. Then as 3 lizardmen stepping onto the path as if they owned it because they did. They were tall, heavy-shouldered, and they carried their spears the way men carried good habits. One in the middle wore a band of woven reeds around her throat threaded with shells that clicked in a language the wind would repeat for anyone who cared to listen. She studied Naruto the way hunters study water. Is it clear? Where is it deepest? What lives in it? Then, carefully, in a voice that had learned 100 hymns and kept only the useful words, leave. The lake keeps its own stories. Naruto didn't reach for his vest. He didn't point at a seal or invoke a title. He bowed enough to acknowledge the ground beneath her feet. He put his hand to his chest and then to the water with 2 fingers, palm down. SSHA hum, he said. His accent wrong in a way that carried effort, not mockery. For the water's patience. A flicker went through the lizardmen like sunlight glitching on scales. The leader's crest lifted a fraction and then settled. Her eyes, a green so dark they were almost a second night, came closer. You learned that greeting from someone who likes you, she said. Or from a dead person who liked talking. Yes, Naruto said. It was the right answer to both. He had learned it from a fisherman old enough to remember a different lord, who had made an offering that amount. Ed to not spitting when he spoke about it. The leader took 1 step forward, moved by nothing, anchored by everything. I am Sashai of the cool depths, she said. The way she said the name made the air stand up straight. Priestess. Speaker for 3 clans who do not agree on anything except when to keep their mouths closed. I'm Naruto, Naruto said. I don't speak for anyone without asking first. She looked at Nia, then at Lupus Regina. Your pack is a loud son, she said of the maid. And your bow is honest, she said of the archer. Thank you, Lupus Regina said cheerfully. Nia nodded once, as if praise from strangers needed to be stored carefully lest it rot. We came to talk, she said, because Naruto had not and because sometimes the obvious needed a door. Talking is a kind of war, Sashai said, without heat. You have the smell of the tomb that walks. Your other lord sent a spear king before. His plan wanted a long red day. We hated it the correct amount. We're not doing that, Naruto said. If he wants to fight you now, he'll have to fight me first. Sashai's eyes went half-lid. Do you carry his spine? Naruto blinked. No, I have one already. It is a phrase, she said. Do you carry his word in your body? Oh, he said. That, yes, he trusts me. I trust him. He does long math. I do short math that lasts. Something eased around Sashai's mouth. Not a smile, that would have shown teeth. You may ask, she said. Asking is not getting. Then let me ask the way your grandmothers ask, he said. Give me a listening night. Her crest stirred. The other 2 lizardmen shifted their weight. As if old ritual had pulled at muscles you needed for swimming fast. You know that right, she said. It wasn't a question. I know enough to be respectful, he said. Not enough to be stupid. Sashai considered him for a long beat that had the weight of a decade. This wetland isn't friendly to men, she said. It is sometimes friendly to women who remember the cold. It is always friendly to the hungry. She flicked her chin toward a low stand of trees half drowned in their own reflections. The listening place is there. You will not draw blood. You will not shout. You will not make a light that thinks it is a new sun. If you insist on singing, sing softly. Define softly, Lupus Regina said. Sashai's gaze landed on her and, briefly, warmed. Like a mother who doesn't want to wake her child. Not like a wolf. I am both, Lupus Regina said brightly. All compromise. Nia hid a smile. The reeds refused to. Sashai extended a length of cord from her belt. Braided reeds dyed a slate blue and threaded with small bone plaques. We bind visitors so the water remembers them, she said. We don't keep the bind. It is a courtesy, not a leash. Nia extended her wrist without being told. Sashai tied the cord around it, swift and neat, and the plaques skittered like teeth deciding not to bite. She tied Lupus Regina's next, and the maid watched the plaques with exaggerated piety. Naruto offered his wrist last. When Sashai's fingers brushed his skin, her crest rose a fraction again. Something of the lake tested the edge of his chakra and found it unlike. She met his eyes without flinching. You will draw attention, she said. You are a bell with legs. Not if I can help it, he said. You can't help it completely, she said. But you can choose how you sound. She sent a whistle like a thrown pebble across water. A boy with a spear almost longer than his future slid out of the reeds and scowled in awe at Lupus Regina. Sashai jerked her chin. Guide them to the listening place, she said. No chatter. If you die, I will be irritated. The boy nodded solemnly, then ruined the effect by tripping over a root and saving the spear with a grace that would have impressed a cat. They followed. The listening place wasn't a place, not exactly. It was a kind of quiet laid over a fat bend in the water where roots of an old tree had become a woven basket. The basket would hold 3 for a night if you respected whom it belonged to. If you didn't, it would roll and the mud would clap behind you as you went under. They sat. Nia with her bow AC. Ross her knees like an apology she refused to make, Lupus Regina with a pouch of herbs she needed like dough, Naruto with his back to the water and his feet braced against a root. The sun went from coin to bruise. Nets of insects lifted and fell. Frogs tuned themselves and then grew bored of being precise. Naruto reached for sage mode like you reach for a mug in the dark without wanting to knock it over. It came slow, careful. Under the skin. The world's breath passing through him, tasting his blood, deciding it wasn't offended. The reeds sharpened. The fish below the basket were coins with intent. The air tasted of peat and something else under it, metallic as a wound that hadn't clotted yet. Don't overfill, he told himself quietly. Don't overfill, Lupus Regina echoed, because repeatin'. Someone's good advice back at them was her love language. Nia leaned her shoulder into his for a moment. If we hear something big, she murmured, do we pretend to be logs? Logs float, Lupus Regina said. I recommend floating. Naruto smiled and then let the smile go because a ripple of wrong threaded the marsh. Not threat. Not yet. Attention. The shape you make when you lean forward to hear. Who's coming to your door before you decide whether to be home? Don't fight what isn't here, Naruto said. It's here, Nia said. It just knows how to be where it isn't. The first pass was under the basket. A pressure change that made the water weep up through the roots before it thought better of it. Then a whisper. No sound, simply the memory of a sound you'd forgotten. Then a convulsion at the far bank where reeds lay down flat as if remembering a larger wind. Something slid its width along the edge of the marsh and tasted the human on shore with the same casual interest with which rain chooses which stone to make interesting. Naruto didn't move. The knight appreciated that. He made 2 clones with a thought, lighter than he'd have risked in any other world. Here, clones pulled at the mana in the air like rude swimmers. He made them small and mean and gave them orders with a look. One eased away along the route, making the mistake a goat would make. The other went straight across the water with the grace of a dragonfly and the stupidity of a man. The attention swiveled toward the second. The water bulged. Teeth that were not teeth. Not exactly. Plates, interlocking, the idea of chewing. Made flesh. Hissed out of a mouth that was more geometry than biology. The thing's eyes were too many, and they were set in a pattern that suggested the designer had been bored of symmetry for centuries. Naruto didn't hit it. He pushed water over the clone's head just enough that the avatar took longer to decide if it had a right to eat a ripple. The clone folded itself into the wrongness between two waves and vanished right before being reduced to late algebra. The creature's bulk surfaced in a knot of muscles like scared rope. Nia's hand tightened on her bow. "I don't have an arrow for that," she said, not apologizing. "Don't need one," Naruto said. "We need to be bad food." Lupus Regina scattered a pinch of herb into the air. The scent that rose wasn't sweet. It wasn't nasty. Chi was memory. Cold hands on a feverish forehead, broth you didn't want, the squint of a priest who had to count bodies. The predator shivered. The water around it declined to be water for a second, then remembered itself and shut up. Sage mode showed Naruto edges. The bones under the plates where joints had to be, the nerve lines that overreacted when tickled, the places where intent collected like frost. He breathed it in, breathed it out to nothing. The creature pivoted and moved toward them, slow and certain, as if being a rumor in a myth had left it very patient. Naruto didn't throw a Rasengan. He didn't even make the shape in his palm. He drew a circle in the air with his hand the size of a plate and filled it with wind so thin it wasn't there. Then he tilted the circle's lip. The air above the creature decided to be 2 degrees cooler. Mosquitoes swarmed it like clergy at a fresh heresy, then pulled away and sulked. The thing's head lifted half an inch. It was a small insult, but insults traveled. Sashai arrived like a shadow acquiring mass. She didn't splash. She didn't announce herself. One moment your skin was just yours. The next, it knew someone behind you had an opinion about how you were breathing. She stood at the edge of the basket, hands open, claws retracted. She began to speak the old way, the one that didn't need air or ears. The reeds answered, not as subjects, as gossips who'd been waiting for a good story. Gas bubbled up from the bottom where old reeds had rotted. The bubbles pushed a slick over the water that altered the taste of the night. A current shifted slow as hurt, and the creature's bulk had to recalculate where its power belonged. "That is not one of ours," Sashai said softly, not turning her head. "No," Naruto said. "A visitor. Curious. Rude. Like you," she said, dry. "Less handsome," Lupus Regina said. The thing turned. It had a face if you knew how to look, not where you expected, not single. Its attention smothered and picked at Naruto's sage mode in the same motion. It had learned over long time that wisdom was meat, and it was hungry. It came. Nia would have shot if shooting mattered. It didn't. She reached into her quiver, found nothing useful, and made a decision that would have made her old instructors proud for the wrong reasons. She took out a spool of line and a hook, snapped it onto a dart-sized rod. She'd fished once as a child. The muscle memory remembered how to pretend. "Go high," she told Naruto. He didn't ask what she meant. He let his sage breath deepen, not to glow but to outline the shapes of the world like pencil lines you can erase. The thing's intent focused. The surface went glassine. The moon found itself and decided to hold still. Now, Nia breathed. Lupus Regina flicked her herbs directly into the thing's near eye. They weren't poison. They were story. Ashes from a birth fire, salt from a widow's tears, mint from a grave someone had chosen to tend. The eye flinched because all eyes do, when given the truth in a form they didn't ask for. Nia cast. The hook snicked into a fold of the creature's outer plate where it wasn't wise enough to be armor. It didn't go deep. It didn't have to. The line drew a map directly to a nerve that sent messages past thinking. The creature jerked. Naruto's wind caught the jerk and made a stumble. There, barely, an opening. He didn't strike for damage. He struck for posture. He slapped the water in front of the thing's jaw with his palm, hard. The splash sheeted up and returned in the wrong direction, a wall of water that arrived nose first. The CR. Ichir recoiled, an instinct older than plotting, and rolled over once, huge and awful, plates scraping plates, then slid away into deeper dark on a line only it could read. Sashai's prayer never stopped. It thinned, narrowed, then widened into something like laughter with no sound in it. The gas bubbled stronger, a stink that would cling to skin for a day. The thing's nerves disliked it. It chose a different canal. A knot of reeds rose slow as knees in church and blocked the obvious pursuit. Everything that had been on the surface decided to be underwater for a while and left them to listen to their own hearts again. They didn't move for a long minute. Then Nia exhaled and hauled the line up. It came up clean. The hook had nothing to boast about. "You broke nothing," Sashai said. Compliment, from her. "We broke our nerve a little," Lupus Regina said cheerfully. "That counts." Sashai inclined her head a hair. "You called no lightning," she said to Naruto. "You made no big sun. You moved small. Storms that are always loud get shot," Naruto said. "Better to be rain sometimes." Her crest flexed. "You did not show your worst self. That is a choice." "It is," he said. She stayed with them the rest of the night. Not speaking, sometimes touching the water with the back of her knuckles the way you pat a living animal without needing to own it. When Dawn stitched a ragged edge over the cattails, she stood. "You listened," she said. "And you were listened to." She made a short gesture that was neither invitation nor dismissal. "Come. The chiefs will pretend to be angrier than they are." The lake village sprawled across 3 hummocks where woven platforms turned flood into furniture. Houses were long and low, thatch layered like overlapping shields. Ropes crisscrossed overhead with charms spinning slowly, bone fish, polished river glass, bits of shell carved into teeth. Children ran on narrow planks with the terrifying, unbothered grace of creatures who had not yet fallen and learned fear the expensive way. Sashai walked like the water had made a path for her and would be offended if she used another. They crossed a broad circle hammered flat by years of arguments. At one end, a pole stood with little cords tied to it, each with a single plaque, each plaque carved with a simple stroke. Not names, memory. The air there had the mood of a shrine and the mood of a kitchen. She brought them into a house hung with skins thick with oil and thyme. Chiefs. 3. One with a missing lower jaw and a voice louder than anyone's because he had never had to wonder how he sounded. One with a line of scars down her flank where a boat had remembered teeth. One narrow, almost delicate, fingers stained with some blue dye that had decided to live in them forever because it liked the view. They heard Sashai's report, their eyes sliding to Naruto without asking him anything. Then the jawless chief spoke, words soft until they weren't. "The Spear King's plan was honest," he said. "He would have killed many of us and then fed the rest. We would have respected it. It would have been a mistake," Naruto said. "We respect not making mistakes on purpose." Silence. The dye-fingered chief glanced at Sashai. The scarred chief's tail flicked twice. Sashai set her hands flat on the table. "He seeks a right," she said. "Champion's bargain." The narrow chief lifted a brow ridge. "Not a raid, not a debt war. Rights travel longer," Sashai said. She looked at Naruto. "Do you agree to our customs?" "Yours," he said, "not mine. I'm here to be your neighbor, not replace your older brother." The jawless chief huffed. It was very nearly a laugh. "Speak," he said. "Set your stake." Naruto took a breath and let generosity be his first weapon. "If your champion wins," he said, "I bring no troops to your water and fight only those fights you pick for me. I build for you when you ask. I go away when you ask. If my champion wins, you bind a cord to my wrist and call me when you want to drink a river dry with less dying." The room listened to the shape of the deal, not the words. It liked the shape. "Who fights?" the scarred chief asked. "I do," Naruto said. Sashai's crest rose, then flattened. "You have other fighters," she said carefully. "You have a wolf who likes bandages." "I'm asking to be your neighbor," Naruto said. "I should carry the bucket." They didn't argue. They simply moved. The dual ground wasn't the argument circle. It was the water. 2 platforms were unrolled onto the surface with ropes and careful anger. They sat 20 paces apart, anchored to stakes that were older than some grudges. In between, the marsh's skin lay smooth as if inviting a lover to try something foolish. The champion arrived from the other side of the village with very lit noise and the kind of attention people give a storm they've learned to live with. He was called Shuru of Stone Tail because he had once survived a rock falling onto his spine and had come back with a tail like an oar. He carried a spear whose shaft had been carved by a father who had expected to die before he finished it. He stepped onto the platform and the platform obsessively remembered how to float. Naruto stepped onto his. He didn't draw a sword because he didn't wear one. He took the stick he'd planted in the false kill slope and hollowed a channel down its center with wind until it as lighter than it looked and strong enough to hold decisions. It was not a shinobi's staff. It was a thing the marsh could respect. They stood, water yawning between them. Shuru dipped his spear once, a greeting that also promised to be a regret if anyone misread it. Naruto bowed without lowering his eyes. He moved first because it saved people from pretending to be patient. He didn't run. He stepped from one edge of his platform to the other, let his heel hang for a moment, and the platform decided to begin to tip, then didn't, because he took the weight back with a smile. The smile wasn't for Shuru. It was for the water. Shuru's mouth didn't move, but something around his eyes softened a hair. He stepped forward with a shallow thrust that would have hooked under a rib if there had been a rib available. Naruto raised the staff and caught the spear on that hollow channel. The sound their meeting made wasn't a clash. It was a tap two craftsmen make when they test a joint. Shuru was heavier. He tried being heavier in every direction at once. Naruto let him. He kept his shoulders soft, let the shove travel through his elbows, down into his hips, and out his feet into the platform, which groaned and then remembered it loved him. He stepped to the side that would have been water if he were less certain where his feet needed to be. He wasn't uncertain. He found the little bit of air it had trapped itself under the platform's edge and put his toes on it like a household god being accommodated by a chair that hadn't expected company. Spear blurred. Staff became negative space, the absence of an obvious wound. Shuru rotated his wrists and brought the butt of the spear up hard toward Naruto's jaw. Naruto ducked and spun simultaneously, something you teach your body to do after it has learned not to throw up when the world pivots under it. The spear passed through hair. The staff wrapped the shaft near Shuru's back hand and made his grip complain. Not a disarm, a reminder. Laughter, small and politely kept to mouths, rippled from the platforms. Children laughed out loud because they were bad at politics. Water sprayed in the middle distance where a fish the size of a small mistake forgot to be careful. The platforms swayed. Naruto crooked the staff down onto the surface, dipped it, used the thin stick like an oar to move not his body but his options. Shuru's eyes narrowed. He nodded, just once. He respected the improvisation and said so without wasting a noun. They fought. They made the kind of fight where 5 seconds could be explained with an hour and still leave the story worse. Shuru was thunder in a long room. Naruto was wind in a corridor that opened and shut at its own pleasure. 3 times Shuru could have cut skin. 3 times Naruto made the water think it had a right to be in the way. Twice Naruto could have opened Shuru's throat with the staff. Yes, with wood, it's possible. Twice he hit scale with that hollowed stick instead and made a sound that rang into the village's long bones. The 3rd time decisions stacked too quickly to choose between them. Shuru's spearpoint landed exactly where Naruto's stomach had been, and Naruto's staff landed exactly where Shuru's wrist no longer was. They both stopped. They both stepped back. They looked at each other with the satisfaction men get when they recognize they are being improved upon. Again, Shuru said, and it wasn't a request. They went longer. Sage Mode waited like a friend you could call at midnight. Naruto held it off because he wasn't here to prove he had more than Shuru. He was here to prove he didn't need it to keep people from having to have this conversation again next season when someone hungrier came calling. Shuru shifted the fight's rhythm from spear to tail without warning. The tail came flat and cruel for Naruto's thighs. Naruto jumped and tapped Shuru's shoulder with the lightest hit he could deliver that would still knock a decision out of his head. Shuru shook high, mself like a dog that had remembered rain and grinned. There, teeth, and came in close where spears were awkward and hands were honest. Naruto let the staff compress between them. He pushed it up. Shuru pushed down. They made a hinge. The hinge was the fight's truth. Naruto let go first and stepped into the crowded space at the same time he seated it. He banged the butt of the staff on the platform quaked. Shuru stepped to keep his feet and found none where he thought they were. He kept his spear. He lost posture. He lost initiative. He didn't lose dignity. Naruto could have swept him. He didn't. He placed the staff against Shuru's throat with a gentleness that could become cruelty if ignored. Shuru froze. Not fear. Acknowledge. He lifted his chin enough to make a decision easier for both of them. Naruto removed the staff and stepped back. He went to a knee first. Before Shuru could kneel, before an argument about victor and defeated could heat the room. Heads around the circle tilted as if something large had passed overhead. Sashai didn't blink. Shuru thumped his own chest with the spear butt, a sound that knocked dust out of rafters. He unclasped a small band from his upper arm and tossed it to Naruto. Naruto caught it one-handed and bowed in a way that would have made certain aristocrats talk about his poor taste in ritual. The children didn't care. They howled. Several leapt into the water and had to be fished out by laughing aunts. The chiefs approached. The jawless one clapped Shuru's shoulder with a blow that would have broken a human collarbone. The fingered one went to the pole with the cords and untied a blue length with 2 plaques. She returned and held it out to Sashai without saying anything. Sashai took it. "Hold out your arm," she said to Naruto. He did. She tied the cord below his elbow, tight enough to remember, loose enough that he could forget to be careful and not lose a hand. The bone plaques clicked. One with a single notch, one with 2 crossing lines. She pressed her thumb to the center of his forearm with a pressure that registered in all the lakes he might ever see. "Memory," she said. "Not leash." "Neighbor," he said. "Neighbor," she agreed, and the word fit in her mouth without cutting her. Lupus Regina clapped loud. The maid launched into congratulations with the energy of a festival on a tight budget. Nia turned her face away for a moment, rubbed her eyes with her thumb and forefinger, then blamed the marsh gas when Lupus Regina teased her. She stepped up to Shuru and said something in a low tone that made the champion's head go back and his shoulders move once, sharply. He liked her. She had the sense not to make a ceremony of it. The treaty wasn't written. Not here, not now. It was spoken. Sashai said the terms. Naruto said them back. The chiefs added small edges, a bit of pride here, a bit of stubbornness there. He didn't sand them down. He kept every burr that meant something to someone who already lost more than he'd been asked to. He added one clause on his own, and he felt Sashai's glance when he did. "If we're wrong about a danger," he said, "and we order you into it, you can refuse. The price will be ours to pay." "That is an ugly promise," the scarred chief said. "It's an honest one," Naruto said. They ate. Food had the inevitable mood of victory. Too salty, burnt at the edges. Delicious because hunger makes good judges of us all. Nia spoke with women who carried ropes on their shoulders like jewelry. Lupus Regina made a small child laugh and then yip, retreating with theatrical panic when the child bit her glove. Sashai sat with Naruto on a platform on the edge of the village and watched the light go down the long way. Neither spoke for several minutes. The silence wasn't fragile. It had muscle. "You are not like the other," Sashai said finally, meaning Ainz without saying his name. "He isn't like the other," Naruto said, which was both correct and exactly as helpful as needed. "He is careful where I'm careless and patient where I'm impatient. It works. It works now," she said. "It will work until it doesn't," he said. "Then we make it work again. Or we learn we were wrong." He flexed the cord on his arm, felt the plaques click. "Thank you. It is not a kindness," she said. "It is a bet. I like bets I can lose," he said. "They keep me human." She looked at him sidelong. "You are very proud of that." "Yes," he said. He reached for sage mode without thinking, the way men recheck the latch on a door after they've already locked it. It came easier with the lake binding his wrist, the memory cord teaching his breath how to pace itself. He opened enough to taste his own foolishness and the world's patience. Something vast lifted its head in a stand of trees across the water. Not branch, not bird, not the alligator geometry they'd set back into its proper canal. This was old intelligence standing to see a new toy. The sensation wasn't a sound. It was a regard. A voice that wasn't a voice touched the edge of his awareness, dry and amused as a librarian who had watched generations misshelve a book. "A storm that refuses the sky," it said. Curious. Naruto did not look toward the trees. He did not stand. He turned sage mode down the way you lower a newborn into a bath and pretend you know what you're doing. The attention brushed him like a fingertip dragged across the surface of a bowl of water, then lifted. The reeds forgot they had shivered. Sashai had felt the shift without needing to have a name for it. Her crest smoothed. "Dragon," she said, no awe in the word. "Only information." "Dragon," he agreed. "The kind that watches cities like fishermen watch floats." "We do not fear them," she said. I fear them, he said. I fear everything that can take choices away. It keeps me honest. You will make us enemies, she said. Then we'll make them neighbors, he said. He could feel her glance at that, and he let the absurdity be the point. They slept at the lake's edge long enough to count as rude and not longer. In the deep of the night he dreamt of a crown made of silence being lowered over a skull that wasn't his, and it touched down, the wind stopped and the color went out of the morning. He woke with his hand wrapped around the cord on his arm like a man holding someone else's hand while telling himself it was for their sake. They left at noon. Goodbyes were brief, functional, promises were made with the economy of people who had learned that small oaths last longer than large ones. Shuru thumped his chest once more. Sashai didn't wave, her chin went up the slightest degree, and that was a blessing. Will they keep it? Nia asked as the wetland swallowed the platforms behind them and tried to steal her boot with a polite tug. They will keep the parts that cost them, Naruto said. The rest we'll have to keep with them. And the dragon? Lupus Regina asked, licking a smear of fish paste from her thumb. He sounded fun. He sounded lonely, Naruto said, and didn't explain why loneliness made him pay more attention. They returned to Nazarick, damp at the edges and carrying a new piece of the world that had nothing to do with trophies. The throne room received them in its old, expensive light. Albedo's armor articulated as she moved, the sound was a song written in angles. Cocytus arrived like cold made polite. Demiurge waited, pleasantly terrible. Naruto didn't kneel to the throne because he didn't need to. He walked to the side table and set a rolled parchment there anyway, a written version of what had been spoken. Recorded because the living forget and paper enjoys being asked to help. Ainz listened. He stood like a man made of gravity and rules, and chose again to be kind without telling anyone that's what he was doing. Report, he said. Naruto didn't talk about the duel first. He talked about the listening night. He talked about not making light. He talked about a prayer to. Chi didn't ask for anything and gave them everything they needed. He kept it tight because he respected everyone in the room too much to waste their time, and because saying it simply was how you made the point land. Cocytus' eyes warmed, small lights deep in ice. Respect, he said, a word that had cost him pride once and paid him back twice. Your path honored strength. Albedo's mouth pressed thin. At the edges at the clauses where he'd given things away people in her job didn't like giving. She took the parchment, read it like an opponent she planned to beat, and marked a ledger with a tap. Risk accepted, she said. That was her way of writing, I'll fight for this when it hurts. Demiurge hummed, content. The long effect, he said, as a net of little loyalties. They are very delicious. We don't eat them, Naruto said. Metaphorically, Demiurge said, which was his favorite way to be wrong. Ainz took the memory cord gently between two finger bones and lifted it as if testing its weight. You tied yourself to the lake, he said. Not accusation, observation. They tied to us, Naruto said. We just remembered to make room. The skull tilted, which was how Ainz smiled when he remembered he was a king and not a friend. Good, he said. Cocytus, adapt your training logs. No extermination plays without council sign-off. Understood, Cocytus said. He bowed in that slow way of Is that made you understand speed wasn't only a question of pace? Albedo, Ainz said, budget for the treaty's obligations. Demiurge, develop messaging that dignifies cooperation and makes betrayal look gauche. Nia, he didn't turn his head to look at her. He didn't need to file a report on the Theocracy's circle and their equipment. I'd like to know how many more provincial heads are attached to rods who think they're wands. Nia stiffened at being addressed by name and decided, with a small breath, that the most dignified thing to do was agree in a normal tone. Yes, my lord, she said. The words felt like an archery stance in her mouth, comfortable when you stopped thinking about it. Lupus Regina, Ainz said. She stood straighter, pleased. Don't steal their children, Ainz said. Ah, she said, disappointed, then grinned. You're no fun. They are not toys, Ainz said. Naruto hid a smile behind a cough. Albedo wrote something in her ledger that almost certainly wasn't, do not steal children, but might function as such if read with enough irritation. They dispersed. People with jobs went to do them. That was how the tomb worked. A terrible place full of terrifying things to He did what they were told because they had chosen whom to trust. Naruto found a quiet corridor with a fountain that had learned to sound like water on rocks instead of water in a prison. He rolled up his sleeves and washed mud out from under his nails. The memory cord drank the water, then dried itself out of courtesy. He looked at it for a while. Evely would have teased him for sentimentality if she'd been within 30 miles. Nia tossed him a towel without looking. Lupus Regina leaned beside the fountain and kicked it lightly with her heel until it gurgled, then declared that a victory on the scale that mattered most to her at this second. Naruto said nothing and thought of the dragon voice like a fingertip on a bowl. Far from stone, back where the lake knew only the ritual of its own edges. Sashai knelt at the pole with the cords and tied a fresh plaque with 3 small cuts on it. She murmured the names of the ones the marsh had taken last season, because memory without an Adi NCE was still memory and deserved to be fed. She thanked the water for not choosing her today. She asked nothing. In the trees a silver geometry rearranged itself between leaves, the abstract outline of a mind refusing to waste energy on appearing ordinary. The thing that watched didn't breathe. It calculated. Storm, it said in a voice that wasn't air. We will take his eyes. It didn't mean sight. It meant sage stillness. It meant the way he read intention like wind reads a field. It meant the piece of him that could make a lake feel seen. A smaller shape below answered, one of the custodians, agents in a chalk-clean cloak. Eyes hard with purpose he mistook for virtue. The crown is nearly complete, he said. When it blooms, thrones will empty and the world will remember humility. The dragon's attention slid across him like cold water and then away. Humility is a tool, it said. Like crowns, like storms. It moved. The forest decided it had always been empty. Night lapped at the lake, and the memory cord on Naruto's arm warmed faintly as if a lizardman grandmother had put a hand over it in sleep and smiled, once, without waking. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The City of Masks. Rantel didn't greet, it watched. Streets wore dust like a habit. Stalls with half-unrolled awnings hesitated between market and barricade. In the main square, a crier recited tax edits while a woman SWE. PT the same length of step 3 times and then gave up as if she'd been corrected by the stone. Naruto passed under an archway that remembered better kings and let his weight move like a craftsman deciding which beam to trust. Nia walked at his right with her bow unstrung and her eyes tuned to corners. Lupus Regina drifted on his left like warm light that had opinions. They weren't wearing Nazarick's names today. The guild card in Naruto's vest said, Mid-tier Adventuring Company. The sigil stamped in wax on his pocket said otherwise. He kept that one tucked. City smells like when a pot boils just under the lid, Nia murmured. Lifts if you sing to it, Lupus Regina said. We're not singing, Naruto said. We're spending. He spent early. A fruit cart had stuck half a wheel in a rut. He put his shoulder in and set it free without making a speech about it. He paid a boy double for a waterskin and sent him to buy bread for 2 old men leaning on a stoop. He stopped a scaffold from pitching into the road with a hand, a rope, and a please that wasn't polite only because it assumed obedience. The men on the scaffold obeyed. People watched him pay first. They always remembered. Broad sheets moved through the crowd like fish, rumors printed in cheap ink. A cartoon skull with a wreath of leaves peered from the top of one. Mercy clause enacted on border, surrender buys corridor, bread. Another sheet answered with a scrawl. Tomb feeds you, then eats you. Naruto bought both, folded them into the same pocket. They cut through an alley where the smell of simmered bones had moved in for the season. Someone had chalked a map on the brick, arrows for a bread line that pretended to be a festival queue. Naruto tapped the chalk with a knuckle, once, good job, and moved on. The riot started, the way kettles sing. Too much heat and a lid pretending to be a roof. A tax cart turned a corner into a street of people who'd already paid. A guard with a spear put his chin up and a man with a hammer put his chin up higher. Naruto stepped between chins before they discovered each other. Stop, he said to the hammer. You're about to be the wrong story in the right clothes. The man blinked. The guard blinked differently. Someone shouted. Something about Ainz and tithes and devils. The crowd inhaled and then forgot to exhale. Naruto didn't turn to address them. He moved. 3 clones burst from his shadow and went busy. One slapped chalk lines on the stone, arrows that pointed not away but through, turning the clogged square into a path people had to follow just to disagree. One put the loudest man to work moving empty barrels, paid him first, and then yelled at him for being slow. One found the tax clerk and made him count aloud, on a crate, with coins he'd just been given, so people could see the numbers fall in order. Wind, Naruto said, and the little gusts he pushed weren't speeches, they were nudges that moved an elbow, turned a face, lifted a corner of tarp so two women could see each other and laugh at the same bad joke Lupus Regina told 3 times in a row to different people without blinking. A figure in a hood watched from a shadow that wanted to be a doorway. Evil. I didn't look like a hero when she wanted not to. She looked like a rumor wrapped in dark fabric with tired eyes. She observed the way Naruto bent the crowd and refused to pose. He saved a child getting stepped on and didn't look around for someone to hang the scene on. She disliked him for not making her suspicion easier and liked him despite herself. Nia lifted a hand when a rock flew and caught it like a dull bird. No, she told the thrower. He stared, bewildered, because his anger had been busy and did not appreciate being intercepted by a woman who sounded like an aunt he respected. The tax cart rolled. The guard decided not to swing because the work of counting out loud was hypnotic. The street discovered it could exhale. Evely exhaled, too, quietly, and then narrowed her eyes as if annoyed at her lungs. She cut across the street to intercept Naruto when the crowd let him step away. He had flour on his sleeve and 3 flecks of chalk in his hair. He looked like a man who had just fixed a fence. It irritated her in a way she recognized as promising. "Who are you?" she asked from the shadow of her hood. Up close she smelled faintly of cold stone and old roses that had waited in a room with a sheet over the furniture. "Someone who hates wasted chances," he said, and smiled in a way that refused to apologize for being human. "Pat answer," she said. "Stains come out easier if you admit what caused them." Quote, "I'll bring soap," he said. "Bring coin," she said, but her mouth betrayed the suggestion of amusement. Her gaze slid to Nia, catalogued the bow and the stance and the quiet attention. Nia met the look with a nod that had respect in it and no deference. Evely adjusted some internal ledger and changed nothing on her face. The second bell after noon rang wrong. It came out strangled, as if the rope remembered a different hand. Somewhere on the west side, smoke rolled and then pretended not to. A ripple moved through the city, one of those subtle, professional tremors. People went quiet because trained men had started moving. Nia's jaw set. Lupus Regina sighed happily. "Theater," she said. A small obsidian insect dropped from nowhere and landed on Naruto's palm with all the gravitas of a letter with a seal. It clicked once. He flicked it open with a thumbnail. Ainz's voice came through without sound carrying, like water in a good pipe. "Curtain," Ainz said, almost wry. "Our friend begins his play." Demiurge's voice followed, rich and precise. "Jaldabath enters at first smoke. Corridor routes are marked. Civilian casualties will sell the miracle. Leave 2 blocks to burn." "Not my brand," Naruto said, not softly, and snapped the insect shut. Nia watched his face. "Orders. Plan," he said, which wasn't the same thing. "We let the act run where it's painted. We cut where it wandered onto the wrong stage." He bumped her shoulder with his. "You get rooftops. Count wrong men. Call shots." "Wrong men?" Nia asked. "The ones smiling," Naruto said. They moved. Irantel's west quarter was a tangle of roofs and alleyways that women with baskets navigated by thinking in diagonals. Fire had started in 3 places and thought about a 4th. Jaldabath's devils, men in masks, spells pinned to their collars, did what theater does best, chose a frame and filled it with noise. Crowds ran, then remembered where their doors were and ran differently. Naruto's clones unfolded like decisions into the maze. He turned a corner and fell into a street fight that felt like a rehearsal. Devils too clean, screams in the wrong key, a man pretending to die with his mouth too round. He kicked a masked thug in the knee with enough grace to make it look like the thug had done it to himself. He set a support beam in a burning doorway with his shoulder and propped it with wind while 2 teenagers dragged out a trunk that belonged to a grandmother and the idea of her. Nia took the ridge, feet sure as punctuation. "Left," she called, and Naruto didn't argue. An arrow hissed past his ear and stitched a devil's sleeve to a post without drawing blood. The devil turned his head, confused, just in time to see a bucket hit his face because Lupus Regina had decided that was the right utensil. He went down gently, like a man who'd been invited to. "Please don't kill my props," a voice murmured behind Naruto, silky as a new ledger. Demiurge leaned in, an archway that hadn't been there a moment ago, wearing the mild expression of a man whose numbers were still lining up. He glanced at a little slate in his hand where lines and arrows made terrible sense. "If you break the script, you'll buy me dinner." "We can afford dinner," Naruto said. "We can't afford burning the old quarter." Demiurge's smile exposed filed points in idea form, not teeth. 2 blocks burning sells salvation. 2 blocks burning kills people, Naruto said, already moving. He jumped, caught a balcony, flipped onto a roof, and sprinted across tiles still cool enough to trust. New scene. Salvation without arson. Quote, "Lord Ainz," Demiurge said, looking up into empty air and somehow at someone, "your co-king is being adorable." "Let him." Ainz's voice arrived, slow enough to irritate and kind enough to soothe. "A pawn lost is acceptable for a quarter gained." Demiurge's eyes half-lidded with starlight and menace. "As you wish," he said, which meant he'd already rear it. N4 entire paragraphs in the plan and pretended he hadn't. Naruto drove the fight at 3 levels at once. Street. Clones with water buckets and bad jokes. Rooftop. Nia's arrows stitching opportunities into place. Alley. Lupus Regina lifting a man by his collar with one hand and setting him down in a laundry basket because it would be funny later. He did not see the thieves at first. He felt the gap they left. The way a table feels a missing place setting. Something fast and untheatrical skimmed under the performance. A door in the side of the Temple of the Six whispered shut without a sound. 3 men and a woman in traveling gray slipped through a sideways corridor only architects notice. They didn't smell like greed. They smelled like precision. Naruto changed angles. "Nia. Vault," he said. "South transept. Copy," she said, because she'd learned to use short words when running. The thieves were already inside when they got there. Evely, who had been hating the demon's show from a different rooftop, saw Naruto's path and, against her own decent judgment, matched his pace. Street to Eve, Eve to cornice, cornice to a leaded window that hadn't been cleaned because the priest who kept that chore had been sick all month. She cut a sleeve on a nail and didn't care. Naruto hit the transept like a polite wind deciding to be rude. He didn't break the door. He turned the handle and convinced it was time to work. The corridor inside had the acoustics of money. The air was 5 degrees cooler than a good conscience. The woman in gray snapped her head toward him. She wore a mask that didn't pretend to be anything but cloth, and her eyes held the weary contempt of someone who'd buried too many risks under the word necessary. "Hello," Naruto said. "I'm shopping." She threw a hand out. Invisibles in the corridor woke and went boar shape, rushing forward. Naruto didn't try to choke them with braggart chakra. He turned his shoulder and made the wind think the corridor bent. The boars slid past nothing and chose a different wall to love. Stone took the hit with a grunt and kept its counsel. Nia skidded in behind him, knees bending to swallow momentum, and lifted her bow. "You want me to." "Strings," Naruto said. She fired, not at a person but at a quartet of bells hung in a niche that thought it was ornamental. The arrow cut the rope. The bells fell in slow dismay. The alarm they would have rung if rung properly never managed to wake. Evely arrived with the resigned grace of a cat forced to sit in a lap it liked. Her eyes went quickly to Naruto's hands. No seals, no flamboyance. He moved like a man who had taught himself not to knock things off shelves in small shops. "You again," she said. "You again," he said. "We don't do teams," she said. "Temporary accident," he said. "We'll apologize after." The thieves reached the vault. It wasn't grand. Grand vaults were for poems and nostalgia. This one was a squat iron box disguised as an uninteresting row of cabinets for hymnals. The gray-cloaked woman pressed a coin into a seam, turned it a quarter, and the kind of lock that had learned English as a second language muttered and opened. Inside, wrapped in ordinary cloth like an insult, lay segments of worked metal that made Naruto's skin tighten in memory. The piece from the chapel he'd sent back. A sibling. The null crown liked sets. It liked becoming. Don't. Nia said to nobody in particular. We must, one of the men said, and meant it. Fight. Not elegant. Immediate. Naruto moved to block the corridor, Evely moved to crowd the vault door. Nia took the pivot point where space became calculation and made it her job. The gray woman didn't try to stab a king she didn't know. She threw an urn. It didn't break. It opened. Air without air roared. It sucked light out of the high window and then returned it rearranged. Naruto became a sketch for one heartbeat. Evely's hood whipped back, black hair stinging her cheek. Nia's arrow wind. Milled and she caught it wrong and that wrongness saved her. If she'd held it right, the urn would have eaten the shaft whole and taught her about humility with teeth. Lupus Regina, outside, saw a window in hail. She smiled and leapt, bouncing off a doorframe, catching a sill, kicking a gargoyle a little too fondly. She came down the stairwell like something poured out of a pitcher and arrived in tea. Meet a step on a man's foot in a way that made him reconsider his relationship with socks. Rude, she scolded, using his ear as a handle and the wall as a lesson. Naruto slipped past the urn's pull-by. Being somewhere it didn't think existed. He palmed the cloth off the crown segments and saw how each piece wanted the others. Small tongues of metal yearned at the edges. The hunger wasn't loud, it was purpose. A masked thief lunged. Naruto didn't break the wrist. He turned the palm, found the tendon that always tells the truth, and applied honesty. The man's knife clattered, slid, stopped at Ainz's boot and looked up at her like a loyal dog. She kicked it under a cabinet. Evely flicked a charm at the urn and muttered a word that had the shape of refusal. The pull slackened, sulking. She turned on the gray woman. You steal from prayers, she said, accusation mild because the adrenaline had decided to be elegant about it. We steal from fantasies, the woman said. It's a public service. Nia's arrow took the cloth instead of the hand. It pinned fabric to wood, buying seconds but no sermon. The man on the floor wrenched hard and the sound his shoulder made was a warning to future weather. Naruto let him go because he preferred the sound of retreating boots to the math of broken bones in this corridor. Above them, the demon show hit a new verse. The city roared. A balcony gave up. A block caught fast. Naruto tasted smoke in the vault and hated math. Hold, he told Nia. 30 seconds. Long time, she said. Ask the bells, he said, and shoved the cabinet shut with a SCO. Op of wind so subtle it only squeaked like furniture embarrassed to be heavy in front of guests. He ran, not away from the fight, into a different one. He crossed the transept, shoved through a side door, and followed the smoke where it went wrong. A line of flame had jumped a gap it shouldn't have. A grandfather's scrap of silk nailed over a window went up as if it had been waiting all year. Kai, LD stuffed under a table had learned to be quiet about breathing. He didn't draw a jutsu. He put his shoulder under a beam that had decided its life was over, grunted, and lifted. It was clumsy and human and heavy. Wind rushed, not showy. Just enough to ease friction. He held while two men pulled people. He held while a pot rolled, steamed, and hit his shin in apology. He held while a girl clung to a cat that didn't like any part of this and insisted on reminding everyone about it. He came back to the vault smelling like a decision and ash. Nia had a cut on her cheekbone that looked like punctuation. Evely's hood had fallen and she didn't seem to care. Lupus Regina had blood on her gloved knuckles and teeth on her smile. The crown segments were gone. Naruto looked at the empty shelf as it had told a joke that was too long and not very funny. He rolled his shoulder. Rooftops, he said. They hit the roofline 3 breaths later. The thieves ran the way experienced men run. Not fast, not slow, efficiently. As if they knew which tiles had grown tired and which chimneys had been repaired by men who drank on Thursdays. Nia hunted the back markers with arrows meant to annoy, not stop. Lupus Regina cut left and turned up where a thief thought he'd invented a shortcut. Evely matched Naruto's pace without asking why that mattered, shroud tossed back, eyes cutting through wind as if that were a curtain she'd learn to ignore. Why do you care? She asked as they ran. Not a taunt, a calibration. The church kept relics it didn't understand. Easier to take them from here than out of your tomb. He made a face at the word tomb while jumping a narrow alley. We like our mistakes where we can watch them. Comforting, she said dryly. A thief jumped for the next roof and his heel clipped a gutter. He pinwheeled, recovered, cursed, the kind of curse that had paid rent before. Naruto's hand snapped. A kunai with a thread of chalk flew. It missed, on purpose, and kissed the man's cloak seam. The chalk left a whisper. Naruto's palm itched when the mark set. He smiled, mean and pleased. They crossed into a district that had decided to see the demon invasion as an excuse to settle old grudges. Men with old knives shouted in joy at young men with new debts. Naruto hated it and didn't have time to fix it yet. He jumped a skylight and felt the roof flex under him with the elasticity of good wood. Evely passed him, coat flaring quick and absurdly dramatic, because sometimes you have to let theater have a vowel. They dropped into a chapel from above through a window that had already surrendered. Colored glass lay on the floor like expensive rain. The thieves hit the nave and split, 2 for the side door, 1 for the transept, the gray woman for the altar where a piece of cloth had been folded and tucked out of sight. She grabbed it without looking. Old reflex. Evely arrived on the altar rail like she'd grown there. Her hand snapped out and closed on the woman's wrist. The woman's mask moved with a sound that might have been laughter if laughter wore knives. Not a devil, Evely said, looking into eyes that believed in hard things. Something worse. An optimist, the woman said, and twisted. Naruto went for the man carrying the crown segments. He cut him off in the aisle. The man dropped his shoulder and tried to drive through. Naruto put 2 fingers on the man's forehead and shifted his weight. The man stumbled and the cloth-wrapped metal kissed the floor with a thud that was too soft for what it was. Nia planted an arrow at the man's foot so he wouldn't forget where it was. Lupus Regina took the side door headfirst and regretted nothing. She came back a half-breath later with another man attached to the scruff of his jacket like a bad idea attached to a sermon. The gray woman made a decision he liked and hated. She looked at the civilians huddled under the balcony, measured the cost of being stubborn against the weight of years left to fight, and let go. Evely did not press. That was their first intimacy. Take it, the woman said to Naruto. No theatrics. If I try now, I lose 3 I can't afford to lose. Naruto nodded, quick. He bent, lifted the cloth, felt the metal try to rise to meet itself. It hummed under his palm like a wasp you could call by name. He wrapped it tight and tucked it under his arm like bread. Thanks, he said, because manners matter even in wars. Tell your choir. Her eyes snapped. Don't call them ours. She threw a smoke pellet that didn't stink and didn't confuse anyone who knew their own feet. When the air cleared, the thieves were gone, through a panel in the wall meant for candles with nowhere to be. Naruto let them go because his clones were already dialing chalk and corners and because you choose which doors to chase through. He turned. Evely was there, poised, composed, annoyed at how much breath talking would take. She flicked her gaze at the wrapped metal under his arm. You're keeping that, for now, he said. Or until we decide where it causes the least trouble. Bring coin, she said again, and stepped off the altar like a remark well delivered. She paused at the broken pew where a small boy crouched under a plank. Her eyes softened and then disciplined themselves into different softness. She crouched, coaxed, did not bare teeth to show she had them, and drew him out without telling anyone about it. Naruto saw. He said nothing. He never trusted kindness he had to clap for. They got the quarter down from burning. Not entirely. Fire is proud. But the block demiurge, wanted sacrificed lived to complain about it later. Naruto set a line of buckets in a rhythm and the city remembered how to hand things to each other without asking who owned the water. On a roof 2 streets away, Jaldabath threw wide his arms and laughed. It was a good laugh, hollow and charming and crafted to sell salvation. Demiurge, inside the costume, enjoyed the engineering and forwarded tally sheets to Ainz in his head. Losses minimal, he thought. Narrative intact. Co-king insubordinate in a way that sells better than the brochure. In a cellar where the city kept its better wine and its worst secrets. A man in gray, the one whose wrist still itched where Naruto's chalk had spoken, laid the final segment of a circlet into a waiting ring. It didn't click. It sighed. The room dimmed as if embarrassed. He lifted the assembled thing with a flinch he refused to let reach his face. Null crown, he said, and behind him someone in a white hood inclined a head. Step 1, the hooded figure said, voice still winter. Find the field. Cats, the man said. Where kings play. And the storm. Busy, the man said. But not for long. Back in the breathing quarter, Naruto met Demiurge. Ease annoyance with a towel over his shoulder and ash on his knuckles. They faced each other in a narrow street that had discovered it still had room for two rulers' emissaries. You cost me a tableau, Demiurge said mildly. You cost me a neighborhood, Naruto said in the same tone. Lord Ainz accepts your edits, Demiurge said, and even managed to sound like he meant it. He is very generous. He is, Naruto said, and meant it. Demiurge tilted his head, foxes whispering in the tent of his smile. You saved people who will resent paying us later out of principle. Good, Naruto said. Principle spends well. Evely watched their exchange from a windowsill at shoulder height, hood up now, face a suggestion. If she'd had a pulse, it might have ticked faster at how easily the man in blonde hair said us and him in a sentence about a skull in a throne. If she'd had blood, it might have warmed at the part where he'd gone alone into a burning door because nobody had written that scene for him. She dropped to the street and brushed ashes off her sleeve. She looked at Naruto and didn't look away. You're not from here, she said. Neither are you, he said. A smile tugged at her mouth. She let it have one corner. Careful, I bite. So does he, Lupus Regina chirped, polite, which earned her a look from Nia and a quiet laugh from Evely that sounded like glass deciding not to break. Naruto handed Evely a small packet, the kind you pass in crowds. Not a bribe, not a demand. A promise of usefulness. She opened it with 2 fingers and found a charcoal sketch, 3 faces, gray cloak. Ed thieves seen from angles no one with normal eyes should have been able to collect in the chaos. Each had a small mark where chalk had kissed them. Each mark, if you knew how to look, pointed toward a particular gate in the city's outer ring. You trust me, she said, surprise a hair louder than sarcasm. I trust your taste in enemies, he said. We're both allergic to cages that call themselves crowns. She tucked the sketch into her cloak with the ease of a person who had been tucking useful trouble into her clothes for a very long time. Her hand brushed his as she did it. Cold met warm. Neither flinched. It wasn't a vow. It was an agreement to consider one. Dusk draped the city in bruised purple. Jaldabath's final flourish went off with predictable applause in streets that had been primed to cheer survival. Ainz's obsidian insect clicked once more on Naruto's palm. Report, Ainz said. Quarters breathing. Vaults lighter, Naruto said. We intercepted a piece the choir wanted. Not all of them. Ainz's silence bent gently. Good, he said at last. Bring what you caught. We'll decide what to do with what we can't know yet. Nia rolled her shoulder and winced as the cut on her cheek tugged wrongly. Lupus Regina licked a thumb and reached. Nia batted her hand away with a glare that promised friendship if no more licking was attempted. Lupus Regina solemnly promised nothing and smiled. They walked the last length of street at an ordinary pace. A woman leaned out a window and shouted thanks down to nobody in particular. A man cursed at the price of fish. A boy chased a cat that had remembered a different name. City, resumed. Evely fell into step beside Naruto without announcing a reason. If you were going to lie to me, she said, sounding bored, now would be a good time. Ask me a question I want to lie about, he said. What are you? She said. Tired, he said. Hungry. Loud, she huffed. Useless. Accurate, he said. They reached a plaza where a fountain attempted to forget it had been a gallows once. Naruto set the wrapped metal on the edge and watched reflected light slide over fabric. Evely didn't look at it, which was how she looked at the thing that mattered more. Her eyes tracked faces. She was counting the ones who would sleep and the ones who would pretend to. Who will wake afraid? Naruto asked, quietly. She pointed without naming. There. A woman who had closed one shutter and left the other a palm's width open. There. A child with hands on both ears, listening too hard to remember not to. There. A man with his jaw clenched so tight the bone would ache the next day. Naruto nodded. He didn't promise anything dumb. He just looked, and his face changed the way it did when he added a name to a ledger that only he saw. She noticed the change and filed it next to the fact that he kept his body between her and a street she didn't need protecting from. It was a stupid, small chivalry. She valued it more for being small. Tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow, he agreed. They parted the way competent strangers do. At a corner, no flourish, each aware of the other 5 seconds longer than necessary. Night found Nazarick with its lights exact and its stone polite. Naruto set the cloth and metal on a table that didn't like occupying the same surface as a problem. Ainz stood with his hands behind his back like a general considering whether to be kind. Relic, Ainz asked. Peace, Naruto said. One of a crown that hates theater. Albedo's eyes narrowed. World item. Close, Naruto said. Feral cousin. Demiurge's smile was essentially academic. Our custodians assemble their tool. They plan a stage in the cat's plains. We will meet them there and teach humility to ideology. Humility is a tool, Naruto said. Exactly, Demiurge said, delighted. Cocytus stood very still and sharpened patience on his spear. Crown, he said, tasting the word. Null. Naruto rubbed mud memory off his fingers that wasn't there anymore. E-cord from the lake sat warm against his forearm, bone plaques clicking faintly like a grandmother's good advice in a crowded room. We go tomorrow, he said. Ainz inclined his skull. We do. He lifted a bone hand and lowered it. Not quite a benediction. Well done, he said, and that, here, was a feast. Far from stone and ash, in a room built to be unremarkable, the custodians finished their task. The circlet lay across a cloth the color of bureaucracy. The last segment settled. The metal didn't shine. It refused light politely, like a well-bred predator. A white hooded figure reached out. Did not touch. The empty throne has a key, the voice said. The world will breathe without the taint of divinity. Platinum will be pleased, someone murmured, not meaning coin. In a space between choices. A dragon lord folded a geometry around a thought and watched the circle without eyes. He is coming, a softer voice said at the room's edge. A seer, an accountant, a coward, it didn't matter. It was true. The storm with legs would be there. And the crown would be, too. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Empty Throne. The cat's plains breathed like a sleeping animal. Heat cooled in the hollows between low hills. Then slid away under a skin of mist that smelled of rust and miasma. Crows rode thermals without flapping. The ground, where armies loved to remember themselves, had the flattened pat. Ainz of a page already read too many times. Naruto planted the first stake where there ought to have been banners. Not a flag, an awning pole. Canvas snapped as he hauled the rope and the field hospit. Al took shape in clean lines. Shade first, water barrels second, a trench stolen from the wind and taught good manners. A dozen clones brought the rest into existence with the cheerfulness of men who were secretly him. Pallets, a table. A chalkboard with the day's ledger, bandages, souls, tea. Lupus Regina walked through with a bundle of herbs on one shoulder and a grin that said this was her kind of church. You're going to make the enemy very confused, Nia said, dropping a sack of splints and glancing at the empty horizon. Good, Naruto said. Confusion spends well. A line of Nazarick soldiers, the ones who had learned to look human without apologizing, hauled crates past them. A laconic lizardman pair moved the other way with stretchers they'd decided were now theirs. Sashai walked behind them. Fingers skimming the miasma, reading the air like a ledger. The memory cord on Naruto's arm warmed once, a quiet acknowledgement, then lay flat. Ainz arrived without noise, and still the shade seemed to adjust for him. He stood at the hospital's edge, robe moving where there was no wind, hands folded behind his back in the posture of a king who remembered how to be a raid leader. Demiurge, polite as a knife wrapped in silk, waited with a slate and a smile. Albedo's armor stacked light in deliberate lines. Cocytus, spear down, gaze level, was the promise of winter showing up to the wrong season and being obeyed anyway. This is a battlefield, Albedo said, looking at the tent, the water barrels, the chalkboard, the lizards. Not disapproval, calculation irritated by unexpected kindness it now had to budget for. It's where we live today, Naruto said, not unkind. Ainz's skull tilted. Positions. Naruto pointed with his chin. Cocytus holds the left. Mare raises berms where the miasma makes men stupid. Aura runs counterscout. Demiurge plays God with the story. He caught the dry flicker in Ainz's eye socket. You do what you do. I'll handle the part with the breathing. Ainz made a sound that could have been a laugh if air had been a necessity. Acceptable. A runner brought a small obsidian bug in both hands as if it were a relic. Ainz tapped it in a voice that ca. Read winter geometry answered from nowhere. The Platinum Dragon Lord didn't waste syllables. Field confirmed. Null crown assembly intact. Custodian elements entering from 3 vectors. Godkin spearhead secured. 3 vectors. Demiurge repeated, amused. They read. They sing. Naruto said, and wiped his palms on his trousers. We'll teach them to hum on key. He didn't put his cloak on. He rolled his sleeves. 1 for work. 2 for promise. Nia stringed her bow. Lupus Regina tucked a half-dozen bandages up one sleeve and something much less polite up the other. Sashai unpinned a little pea. Ouchen shook wet gray powder into her palm, a smell like a flooded temple. For the ground, she said. So it remembers who walked on it. Drums. Not Nazarick's. The sound came thin across distance, turned fat by the plane. Men appeared in lines as if drawn by a careful hand. The custodians, soldiery wearing white hoods and clean boots too far from cities that earned them. Slain theocracy units W.I.T.H. rods whose songs wanted to make people behave. Priests with cases not meant to heal. And there, Nia's breath hitched. Zeshi Zetsume, Godkin, the living weapon the theocracy treated like a sermon with legs. Higher. A geometry like a silver crown, not the null one. Something older, a dragon's attention made into shapes people could misname. It hung at a distance because it could. Platinum. Between it all, carried on a litter and ringed by 6 cloaked figures with hands too steady for a parade, the thing Naruto had touched in a chapel and hated, a circlet that didn't want light. The null crown. Segments reconciled into a single will. It didn't glow. Glow would have been vanity. It soaked radiance and returned principle. Breathe, Naruto told himself, because Sage Mode didn't like being ordered and the plane had opinions on men who glowed. Ainz walked to the edge of shade and stood where everyone could see him. He didn't raise his arms. He looked at the field and the field looked back. And remembered that sometimes survival meant bowing to maps more complicated than the ones men could draw. He turned his skull a fraction toward Naruto. Command the opening, Ainz said. Not loud. No theater. Delegation delivered like a coin in a friend's palm. Naruto stepped into light and knew 100 eyes weighed him. He didn't announce mercy. He put it where people could trip over it. Had Lupus Regina move the first water barrel into the sun where everyone could see it wasn't poison. He sent a clone to the cusp of no man's land with a crate and a sign. Corridor. Bread. Surrender buys both. Nia squinted through heat shimmer. You think they'll come? I think fear is thirsty, Naruto said. The custodians didn't kneel to the offer. The front ranks locked shields. The 6 around Null Crown lifted their hands in a precise, multi-voiced cadence. The circlet rose a finger's breadth above its litter and the air remembered it had been a different kind of thing before men taught it to carry sound. A pressure pressed down. Ainz's aura, a suggestion of inevitability and countable death, dimmed, not entirely, but like daylight under a fast-moving cloud. The small spells Lupus Regin, alike to keep under her tongue tasted of ash for a beat. Naruto reached for Sage and the feedback hit like biting foil. Not pain, exactly. Interference. The sensation of being read by something that wanted to understand you less. HNH. He breathed, and cut his intake by half. It doesn't kill what we are, he said, to Lupus Regina's brief flare of worry. It tells everyone what to ignore. Rude, she said, tart. Then, to the nearest soldier, you'll breathe anyway. I command it. The custodian drums doubled. Zeshi stepped forward with a weapon that had never decided whether it was a scythe or a spear and therefore pretended to be both. She moved like the plan had been drilled into her teeth. Straight at Naruto, straight at the barrel, straight through anything called mercy. Nia inhaled and held that breath like a held note. On your left, she murmured. Naruto met Zeshi with a body that refused to dramatize itself. He didn't draw a technique with a name. He moved the way he had oved on a swaying platform with Shuru. He let weight be honest. Her blade came for his midsection, the edge drinking air. He ducked a fraction and the metal shaved fabric, not skin. He flicked a wind thread so thin it was a suggestion and it made the ground under her ankle collapse a finger's width. She adjusted without thinking, admirable, and then frowned at herself because men she fought didn't make floors shift with courtesy. Storm, she said without greeting, voice flat and clear. Yield. Choice, he answered, stepping past, putting his shoulder into her shoulder not to move her but to suggest moving. Make one. The front clashed beside them like weather arriving to a conversation. Cocytus line took the left and didn't move. Demiurge's small theaters snapped and rearranged where needed. Mare lifted berms until the miasma coughed and had to go around. Evely appeared at Naruto's periphery the way dusk does, noticed only when you realize colors have deepened. She slid into a duel with a custodian archmage whose hands made elegant nooses in the air. Their spells touched and misbehaved under the crown's geography, collapsing into raw intent. She adjusted faster. It made her angry to enjoy it. Backline. Nia snapped, and 3 arrows flew like a decision delivered. They hit the wrist of a crown bearer, the elbow of the second, the strap of a third's case. Not kills. Disruptions. The cadence of the 6 faltered, then recovered, then faltered again as Nia changed their timing with a petty cruelty only an archer who liked math could deliver. Sashai strode into fog and taught the ground to betray men in white hoods. She sprinkled her wet gray dust in the seam where dirt met miasma, whispered a specific gratitude that had nothing to do with magic, and the earth soft. End for the right feet and stiffened for the wrong. Custodians stumbled exactly where their doctrine said the ground should behave. One went knee-deep and couldn't find purchase because belief isn't a buff you can apply to mud. Null crown. Push. A voice barked from the custodian center. The 6 answered, arms lifting in crisp unison, and something tried to lower itself over Ainz like a lid. Ainz laughed. It wasn't mockery. It wasn't loud. It sounded like the kind of amusement that keeps a hand steady on a scalpel. Delegated, he said without turning, and the nearest Nazarick captains shift on their axes to take a cue that hadn't been given aloud. Naruto grinned without deciding to. Thank you, he said, to Ainz. To the field, to the habit of trust. He didn't examine it. He pivoted back to Zeshi as she cut a shallow crescent that erased 2 of his clones with the indifference of a damp cloth. The null interference turned jutsu outside his body into moths with wet wings. He didn't let them fly. He kept his hands and feet and breath where words couldn't argue with them. Zeshi's face didn't move, but her eyes did, a flicker at his cord, an irritation at the way his grin didn't vanish with his clones. You shouldn't be this light, she said. Neither should you, he said, and they both understood they weren't talking about feet. He sent a clone not to fight but to ask. It ached Zeshi from the wrong angle with the wrong posture, shoulders set like a supplicant's. Her blade slashed the air where its neck had to be and the clone smiled and kept speaking mouthless. If you didn't have orders, where would you stand? The null crown didn't care for tricks that were questions. It missed. Zeshi blinked. The blade shivered. He did it again. Another clone arrived, not to survive but to bother a rhythm. Does obedience taste like bread to you? It took the edge through its ribs and dissolved. What do you call yourself when you're alone? Dissolved. What is mercy if not a weapon you can point at yourself? Her breath caught. Not long. Enough. She came fast then, angry at the insult of a man who fought by asking instead of bleeding. Her scythe came down, and Naruto stepped inside it and tapped the back of her hand with 2 fingers exactly where a nerve carried news to her shoulder. It didn't stun. It reminded. She pulled her strike and then hated herself for pulling it. Don't do that, she snapped. Which part? He asked, and feinted at her shin with a movement that wasn't a technique and still made her adjust. Evely's duel tightened to a point. The archmage drew a sigil in the air shaped like a gentle execution. Evely broke it by speaking 3 words from a tongue he didn't know existed. The air refused to obey. The archmage flinched. Evely used the moan NT to be generous and cruel at once. She struck him with a disruption that wouldn't kill him but would leave him alive to have to think new thoughts. Naruto, she said without looking, 3 on the crown. I see them, he said. And didn't. He felt them. The way intent coalesced around people whose job was to be necessary. He threw 2 kunai underhanded. They hit dirt before boots could, made a laughable clink. And then the wind around them tightened with a pettiness he'd learned from a lizardman grandmother. The crown bearer tripped on the right empty air and missed his mark by a half step. The ring's hum wobbled. Platinum lowered. The geometry above the field folded until even men who worshipped shapes could tell there was a mind inside it. It wasn't a dragon in story form. It was a thought designed for endurance. It spoke without moving. Empty the thrones. The null crown flared. No light, a subtraction. Ainz's name in the world spent itself and tried to return to the ledger and found a blank line. For a heartbeat the field forgot who he was supposed to be. Lupus Regina's pupils shrank. Nia's arrow hum lost resonance. Sashai's powder smelled like wet ashen teeth. Ainz did nothing. It was the kindest thing he could do. Let Naruto's map of people carry the next breath. On the bearer, Nia called, and her voice found everyone who had promised to listen to her even if they thought they outranked her. She shot. The arrow struck the strap on the crown litter, not a man, not the circlet, the point in the system least likely to be defended. The strap snapped. A crown bearer reached to fix it without thinking and stepped into the path of a Nazarick pikeman's shove that had never intended to kill, it merely moved someone who needed moving. The cadence failed for 3 beats. It was enough for people to believe again. Lupus Regina appeared in the backline with an expression any priest would have called radiant and devoured 3 relic carriers without breaking a smile. Mercy was a habit, so was slaughter. She could do both. Behind her, a Nazarick medic wrapped a bandage around an enemy's forearm with the same care he would have used on a friend. The enemy's mouth shook and then steadied. He didn't run. He surrendered. A clone gestured corridor and bread. 2 others followed. It began. Naruto took Zeshi's next strike on the crook of his elbow because it was safer. To risk bone than give ground where the corridor sign would become a joke. He winced, then laughed at himself, then used the laugh like a wedge to lodge under Zeshi's sense of certainty. He stepped in and said, soft and rude and exactly timed, who wrote your name for you? Her eyes flared. The blade checked. He didn't smile. He nodded toward the crown litter. They'll use that to make you smaller until you fit their story. I was born for purpose, she said, furious at the idea that the sentence could be anything but a crown, and then for a sliver of a second there was grief in the word born and it hurt. Maybe, he said, you can still pick the job. She came again. He let her. He met her. He let her again. He began to shape the space around her into questions instead of edges. The 3rd time he didn't dodge. He set his palm on her blade, let wind hold the edge like a careful friend, and looked her in the face. He didn't speak. He let the habit of mercy be louder than his mouth. Someone else shouted. The null crown's cadence tried to find itself again. The white-hooded custodian in command signaled with 2 fingers and the 6 around the litter moved like a single hand. The circlet rose higher and the air went thin. Evely came like dusk becoming night. She didn't touch Naruto. She touched his sleeve. It was the smallest pressure. There and gone, a warning and a gift. Take the opening when it hurts, she said. And then, so soft that the air had to lean to hear, Kino. He did not say her name back. He put it somewhere the wind would know to bring it home later. He didn't wait for the opening. He made one. He lifted his hands and, for the first time in the battle, actually shaped chakra into something with a proper name. The null crown saw the names and sneered at them. He starved the names out of it. He made a Rasengan of almost nothing, wind and friction and the petty insistence of life, and threw it not at a man, not at a relic, but at a drum. The drum cracked. The rhythm faltered. The crown's bearers stumbled on a beat no longer there. Platinum's geometry mismeasured the field by a hair's breadth because even dragons who pretend not to care about lapses do. Naruto sprinted the last distance like a thief too honest to call himself one. A custodian heavy stepped into his way with doctrine loaded in his shoulders. Naruto slipped under the elbow and passed and was in the ring. The null crown hung a man's height off the litter, perfectly calm. Awful, he said, and jumped. He didn't grab it. He didn't strike it. He slapped the air under it with his palm and pushed a laugh into the space. An echo of the one Ainz had given him. Not mockery, mirth. He fed it the noise of people choosing at the corridor table, the taste of marsh gas and mint, the weight of a lizardman grandmother's thumb pressing his forearm. The crown fell a 1/4 inch. It didn't like being near that kind of weight. A white hood moved in from the right. The custodian commander's blade arced for Naruto's back. Naruto didn't see it. Zeshi did. Her scythe kissed the command blade off its line with such contempt that the metal's feelings were hurt for a week. She set her foot, set her spine, and made a decision that had been waiting since someone first taught her what a "we" could mean. Not him, she told the commander. Not today. The commander began, and then realized. The rest of his word was obsolete with his jaw not where he needed it to be. He looked at Zeshi as if she had betrayed a law of physics. Perhaps she had. He fell. He lived. He didn't enjoy it. The ring convulsed. Platinum dropped a layer of geometry in irritation. Ainz lifted his staff like a man acknowledging a joke and spoke 6 syllables in a language so old even the ground listened out of politeness. The sky didn't split. It adjusted. Lines of force bent enough to let men do what they'd already decided to. Nia took advantage. 3 more arrows. 2 crown bearers with raw knuckles and good bones went down, weeping at the wrists from rope burn. Lupus Regina hit the back line like a saw with teeth. Sashai finished her final scattering of gray, bone ash and crushed shell, at the base of the litter and whispered memory into the dirt. The crown lowered despite its intentions, into a patch of ground that had been told stories all morning, and memory is the one thing doctrine never knows how to eat. Now, Evely said, Naruto wasn't a paladin. He didn't throw himself at a holy object in righteous fury. He leaned in. He put 2 fingers on the circlet and breathed. Sage mode rose th. Rough the interference like steam through a loose lid. He didn't try to flood the crown with power. That would have been a conversation on the crown's terms. He exhaled a name, one he had been given at morning by a woman in a place that remembered how to hold water. Not Kyubi, not Kurama, not any of the old weights that had taught him to stand. He exhaled the line cut into the bone plaque on his wrist. The crown jolted, a little. Names aren't aura, bonds aren't buff. The shape of the null narrowed, shivered, like a mouth tasting something salty for the first time. Platinum's geometry tilted. The Dragon Lord thought it about as interesting as anything had been in a century. He didn't get to win the argument. The custodian reserve hit like a door slamming. World items are good at ignoring the small honest things. The ring swelled, angry at having been asked to concede. It pushed back. Naruto's sage sense screamed feedback and went to one knee in his head. Zeshi pulled him bodily by collar, something no one had done in a long time, and shoved him behind her and caught a cut that would have cost him a rib and didn't cost her anything she needed for tomorrow. Pay me later, she said, furious at her own sentence. And met 3 custodians alone. He didn't argue. He moved to where he was needed more, the table, the barrel and the crate and the sign that said corridor. Bread. We're still there. An insult in the middle of a story about annihilation. A Nazarick soldier with a bandaged ear and a surprisingly gentle mouth handed a canteen to a man in a white hood who couldn't meet his own god in the eye after the last 5 minutes. Naruto took over without announcement. You surrender, you eat, he said. You break the oath, you pay later. Choice now. It will feel like weakness, it's the opposite. A custodian boy, because there are always boys where men have built armies of principle, came with shaking hands and set a knife on the table. Naruto nodded. Good, he said, and slid bread across. 3 more came. A woman threw her relic chain on the ground and kicked it for good measure and then cried because having no excuse is louder than the other kind of crying. The corridor began to be a place, not an idea. It disrespected doctrine. The null crown couldn't see it because it didn't shine. It worked anyway. He turned back as Platinum finally came down. Not all the way, just far enough that the Dragon Lord's particular contempt for variables could be applied directly to a man with bright hair and poor respect for geometry. A plane of silver arced toward Naruto like a blade made of opinion. He didn't dodge. He leapt into it. The impact wasn't noise. It was adjustment. Wind met mathematics and decided to ignore a rule. Naruto pushed his palm forward and left a mark on the plane, not a cut. A sigil, not written, healed. The geometry shuddered. The mark closed like a wound refusing to bleed. Platinum paused for the first time this day and acknowledged someone who wasn't a piece or an annoyance. Curious, the thought said again, very clear. A storm that heals. Pick a different toy, Naruto said, breathing hard, grinning like a man whose body had just filed 3 complaints and signed them all. This one bites. The dragon did not answer. It lifted again, and its absence was a comment that might one day become respect if they both survived to make it so. The ring faltered for the last time. Nia's arrow broke the 5th bearer's grip, and the 6th, sweat in his eyes, heart beating a number he couldn't count, stumbled. The null crown dropped onto Sashai. prepared patch and the dirt took it with the greedy tenderness of a grandmother receiving an infant she doesn't like and will love anyway. The crown's null expanded to protest. The mud, having been told 3 stories about winter and famine and oaths kept with blood, declined. It held. Pull back, a white hood ordered. There was more math inside the voice, calculations about retreat and preservation, than zeal. Zeshi lunged once for punctuation, then stopped herself as if obeying a new doctrine written in a language only she had been taught in the last 30 seconds. The custodians began to go. Not rout. Withdrawal with bruised pride. Lupus Regina walked beside one man who left without his relic chain and told him a joke so filthy that if anyone had wanted a reason to live, they would have found it in the punchline. He laughed through a split lip. She patted his cheek tenderly. No statues, she reminded him, and he didn't know why he nodded, but he did. The field didn't cheer. It exhaled. That's all. Ainz lowered his staff a fraction and the miasma obeyed the new barometric pressure of the day. Cocytus counted the dead without making the number into a hymn. Demiurge checked the story's shape and found it oddly pleasing despite his missing tableau. Albedo recorded, risk accepted, 3 times, then underlined it once in red, which meant she would budget for this tomorrow. Naru, to found Evely at the hospital tent where shade and the smell of boiled linen made the air bearable. She sat on a stool beside a pallet, right hand idle except for the tremor she pretended was annoyance. Her hood was down, her hair had ash in it. She looked at 3 patients and chose which to insult back into living. He set a cup of water on the crate by her knee. You didn't bleed, she said without looking up. I'm efficient, he said. I told you. Liar, she said. You're sloppy with your body where it counts. Act, he said, considering the way his elbow throbbed. Habit, she said back, which was fair. He sat, didn't touch her. Let the quiet decide where it was wanted. She leaned, eventually, not to collapse. To share the fact of the day with someone who wouldn't ask her to narrate it. Their shoulders found a comfortable angle. Who will wake afraid? He asked. She pointed with her eyes. That one, she said. Woman with the burned forearm but the steady gaze. Not that one. Boy with too loud laugh who'd been brave for the first time and would chase more of it unless someone taught him different. Him, a Nazarick soldier staring too hard at his own clean hands, working out the cost of not killing. He nodded and wrote 3 names in his thumb ledger, which lived under his tongue and behind his teeth and in the way he walked near doors. Zeshi found them after she had stood very still for a full minute facing the setting sun like a thing that had just been hatched and needed to decide what to imprint on. She carried her side in a way that admitted it was now a tool, not a leash. Nia moved to intercept as a reflex and then didn't, and she surprised herself by not. Lupus Regina watched with her chin on her fist, grinning like a girl watching a stray dog decide which porch to sleep on. Zeshi looked at Naruto, not defiant, something worse, hopeful, and furious about it. What am I, she said, if I choose? Dangerous, he said, and free. Those don't go together, she said. They do if you practice, he said. She considered murdering him for the sentence and chose not to. She set the weapon down as if laying a crown on a pillow. Fine, she said, I'll practice. Evely snorted. He's very annoying to be around when you're learning to be a person, she told Zeshi. You'll manage. Zeshi gave her a look a lesser woman would have called murderous. And Evely returned it with the flat patience of someone who had been dead longer than most wars. Welcome, she said. Try not to kill all of my friends. Try not to be smug, Zeshi said. No, Evely said, and Naruto coughed to pretend he wasn't smiling. Ainz came to them, not making people stand. He looked at Zeshi and Zeshi looked back and did not kneel because that would have been wrong in a new way. He lifted a bone hand, paused, and inclined his skull. An acknowledgement that would make bards furious because it wouldn't sing. It worked anyway. Good field, Ainz said to Naruto, N.D. Somehow the words were warmer than any cheer. Paid out, Naruto said. Albedo arrived with a ledger, because that was how she made apologies that weren't apologies. Your corridor created a supply problem, she said. We'll solve it. Thank you, Naruto said, and she blinked as if the phrase continued to be an indignity and kept walking anyway. Demiurge slid up. Read them all with delight. Your habit sells, he murmured. I resent it less than I expected. Try loving it, Naruto said. Let's not get hysterical, Demiurge said pleasantly. Night fell in a way it never does in stories, gradually, with logistics. Men rolled bandages. Women counted spoons. Someone cried without a sound, and someone else poured water without mercy until the tears stopped because the body got bored with that trick. The null crown lay not on a pillow but in a locked chest under 3 different kinds of promise and one very creative curse. They hadn't destroyed it, not yet. Ainz wouldn't let them. Knowledge had its own mercy clause and too much of the world had already been burned for forgetting. Naruto took the first watch at the field hospital because he wanted to hear the breaths. Evely took the second. Nia took the third and pretended to be annoyed when Lupus Regina sat beside her and offered commentary on the snoring. Sashai slept with one palm on the dirt, a grandmother's habit in a body not yet old. Platinum watched from further up than stars need to be and thought. A storm that heals, he repeated to himself, and a plan adjusted by a degree a lesser mind wouldn't bother measuring. The War recorded losses and rephrased the results as virtue. The custodians of the empty throne argued in low voices about how best to keep the world safe from mercy. Somewhere in a cellar with good shelving, a man whose chalk mark would not wash off his memory tried to forget the way bread had tasted when handed by someone who didn't demand kneeling first. Dawn found the field breathing again. Naruto stretched his elbow, winced, and laughed at himself. He ate stew Lupus Regina called porridge and Nia called edible. He walked the line of pallets and let the sun see those who would see it again. Ainz stood by the hospital door and watched him without interrupting. When Naruto reached him, Ainz said nothing for a while, which was how friends with jobs talk when they can. I delegated the kill decision, Ainz said at last. You did, Naruto said. I will do it again, Ainz said, and there was humor in it in the shape of a policy. Good, Naruto said. I'll keep buying corridors with it. Ainz inclined his skull. Write it. Naruto blinked. What? The mercy clause, Ainz said. Write it into doctrine. Not a tactic. Policy. Bread, corridor, cost accounted for up front. No statues. No hagiography. Results. Nia didn't quite cheer. She did smile at a spot 2 feet to Naruto's left and felt her shoulders forget a weight they didn't have to always carry. Albedo, within earshot because she made a career of it, sighed. Wrote on her ledger, then squared her shoulders. Budget accepted, she said, which was her oath. Demiurge muttered something about tasteful broadsheets again and Naruto ignored him out of generosity. The day took them. The dead were counted. The living were fed. The crown was mapped. Zeshi was handed a cup and told to sit because learning to be a person is exhausting, per Lupus Regina, who bestowed the advice with great authority. Evely leaned her shoulder against Naruto's at the hospital door again without announcing it, testing whether accidents repeat. They did. Tomorrow, she asked. Tomorrow, he said. You'll do something stupid and humane, she said. You'll pretend to hate it, he said. She snorted and looked at the people under the awning, at the lizardman boy explaining to a Nazarick soldier why the cord on Naruto's arm mattered, at Nia stealing a second bowl for a woman who felt guilty for wanting one. She let herself want something, too, and didn't punish herself for it. Perhaps I won't pretend, she said, so quietly that the tent had to fold the sentence and keep it. When they rode back to the great tomb with the sun a neat coin above their left shoulders. The corridor sign had footprints all around it, as if the plane itself had walked over to see what the fuss was and decided, reluctantly, to participate. Naruto left it standing. The throne room welcomed them with steady fire. The 2 thrones sat shoulder to shoulder like decisions made and remembered. Ainz took his seat. Naruto took his. They did not speak. They didn't have to. The air said well done when they breathed correctly. The stone, which was not sentimental, agreed to hold a little longer. Outside, in a world that insisted on continuing, men argued about whether mercy was weakness. Whether crowns should null, whether dragons should be allowed opinions. Inside, a skeleton and a storm drafted policy. 2 rulers, 2 thrones, 1 habit. Chapter 5 end.